This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee. Can I ask everyone please to make sure your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions? And can I ask our clerk, Hannah Barlow, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. No apologies.
Okay, before we get to our main item, we have a couple of quick bits of housekeeping. So item 2, can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? Excellent, well noted. Minutes, can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of October 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record? Excellent. Item 4, can I ask the committee to note the completed, ongoing and closed actions from previous meetings of the committee? Well noted. And actions taken under delegated authority. Can we delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Excellent. So that takes us to item 6, which is our main item of business today, which is the Greater London Authority Mayor's 2025-26 budget. And I'd like to welcome, if I may, Mary Harpley, who's the Chief Officer, David Bellamy, who's the Mayor's Chief of Staff, Richard Watts, who is the Mayor's Deputy Chief of Staff, Faye Hammond, who's the Chief Finance Officer, Anna Casbolt, Assistant Director, Financial Services, Phil Graham, Executive Director for Good Growth, Tunde Oleinka, Executive Director for Communities and Social Policy, and Diane Tranmer, Executive Director of Corporate Resources and Business Improvement. Morning, everybody. So if I kick off with the first question to you, Faye, what are the main challenges incorporating the Mayor's manifesto commitments into this 2025-26 Mayor's budget?
So obviously we're still in a constrained financial situation nationally, and our priority in terms of setting this budget has been to ensure that those manifesto commitments are part of that budget, and as part of building that budget we've ensured that they are starting to be reflected in that particular, within that budget. And you'll see that throughout the paper in terms of some of those priorities that we've set out.
Okay, so the main constraint is just the sort of tight budget situation, because obviously the context of this, you've obviously just had an election, 2 elections, so we have a new government, new mayoral term, new manifesto for that. So the process of incorporating the mayor's plans into the budget, it was sort of a business as usual, constrained by the financial environment.
I would say so. I don't know whether David looked like you wanted to come in.
I mean, to be fair to Faye, we were working on this before she joined us, and of course she's no experience of the process in previous years. We are, as we briefed the committee on separately, taking a new, implementing a new approach to GLA governance. And so, that is happening alongside and is, driving the work to ensure that the Mayor's manifesto commitments are implemented, and this draft budget sets out where we are along that process.
Okay, so quite a lot of the Mayor's manifesto, perhaps it's a question for you, David, so quite a lot of the Mayor's manifesto is dependent on there also being a Labour government as well as a Labour mayor in London. I think There was quite a lot made of that in the Mayor's manifesto. Are you confident that the government will hold up its end of that plan, if you like, or are there particular areas of concern that you think there are?
Well, I mean, I think what I'd say is, the government has come in challenging circumstances, clearly, and is going about things in a very structured way. And so we've seen that, in the context of the budget and setting out the government's overall spending envelope for 25-26. We now obviously await the implications of that, as individual departments work through that, and we await the local government and the police and fire settlements in the usual way. And the government now moves on to what is absolutely key, is the multi-year spending review. Because I think, a lot of the things that were in the Mayor's manifesto were not just about things, oh right, we just quickly need a bit of cash to do this, but were actually about bringing that change, bringing that devolution. And so we'll see the work on that through the multi-year spending review.
Okay, I mean, that's obviously a wait-and-see message. And we had that before the budget, but then we had the budget. And obviously it's now wait and see, I suppose, until the spring. My observation, it's no more than an observation, is that to get things done in a 4-year term, you need to get cracking in year one, and we're quite a bit of a way into year one, and we're still a wait-and-see message. So when does it start to become a problem if cracking on can't commence, do you think?
So I think two responses to that, if I may, Chair. One of which is that quite a lot of the Mayor's manifesto commitments, I've gone through, there's about 74 commitments, I think it is, possibly 75, that sit with the GLA as opposed to other functional bodies. So there's about broadly half the Mayor's manifesto is a GLA item. There's quite a lot of that we are able to just do, and we can go through some of that, I'm sure, during the course of the next two and 3/4 hours. Some of the things that are able to be negotiated with the government, I think the government have been, it's not for, I'm an official of the GLA, it's not for me to sit here and defend the government, but I think they have been quite clear about their timetable for making financial decisions, which is the budget was to set out next financial year's financial parameters, and the comprehensive spending review we anticipate in the spring. Although what spring means in government terms, who knows?
June, in my experience.
I couldn't disagree. Is to set out the next 3-year spending commitments after that. Clearly, London. These papers that we are looking at today were effectively written pre-budget, but we can do in the course of this committee, I think, give you early reflections on where we think we might be at the budget, although it's quite a lot of it is too early to tell because we don't have departmental settlements, we don't have the local government spending settlement, we don't have a lot of the key information that we never have at this time of year. But I think we've always been very clear that the big game in town is the comprehensive spending review, because that sets out, as you rightly say, the kind of control totals and the ambitions for realistically most of the rest of this mayoral term.
Okay, and are there unfunded manifesto commitments, so from the Mayor's manifesto, commitments he made that are as yet unfunded, where there's a question mark over, that would depend on some other external event?
Not that are dependent on external events, so to speak. I mean, there's a number of things, and I think the manifesto was quite explicit in where we were looking to promise to do something versus where we were looking to promise to explore something or work with the government to do that. And we can go through individual commitments, I'm sure, during the course of this session, but I mean the manifesto tried to very clearly signal what could be, to Londoners, what could be done versus what we hope to do, but obviously depended on external circumstances. There are a number of commitments that the Mayor said he, definitively committed to do that he will do during the course of this term, where there is not the funding in this budget to do it yet. It is a 1-year budget and a 4-year term. We never committed at any point that we would do every manifesto commitment in the first year of that term. They will be delivered, though, during the course of this budget and the 3 after.
Okay. In that case, we go to Assemblymember Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. Mary, good morning. To what extent does the proposed 25-26 budget include provision for the delivery of the London Growth Plan?
I was going to turn to Phil, actually, but so a bit like Richard has said, this is a 1-year budget. not the 4-year budget. So it begins to bring in the early work on the growth plan, but clearly doesn't seek to fund the entire growth plan, which itself ultimately won't be fundable entirely from the GLA.
Mary has said a lot of what I was going to say. I mean, the first important point is that we haven't written the growth plan yet, and it's something that we are working on together with London councils and with other partners in London. We are expecting to publish it in the early part of next year, so it's a little early to say exactly what the funding requirement would be. But exactly as Mary says, partly it would not be entirely, it wouldn't be delivered entirely by the GLA, just as we're not putting it together entirely by ourselves. There are significant areas of funding within this budget that are available, that are contributing to the growth plan. There's the funding we provide for London and Partners, the funding we provide for local economies, the funding we provide to small business support, including through UK SPF, and so on. Critically also, the growth plan depends upon skills, depends upon transport and infrastructure, depends also on housing provision, because we know housing affordability is a barrier to productivity. So the growth plan itself will look at the budget in the round, see how that can drive greater productivity, tackle some of the barriers to growth, and to make that more inclusive.
Yeah, thank you, Mary and Phil. I mean, by the sounds of it, like most schemes in this place, we've decided to go down a route but don't really understand what the funding implications are of that, quite frankly, because neither of you have given me a response as to what we're looking for in terms of his settlement. So, Richard and David, I think, have been very fair and have said, look, the mayor's made a song and dance about working with the Labour government, but we won't know what that looks like until we have a multi-year settlement. I mean, nod of a head, was that a fair description? Okay, thank you. So, right. Given that this place is packed with political appointees who do have relationships with the Labour government, do we have no idea, when the mayor is going in and selling his ideas to the government to receive more funding, have we got no clue what price tag we're attaching to the growth plan yet?
What growth plan?
What Howard Dauber's and the mayor's growth plan?
It's not, as Phil said, it's the mayor and London Council's growth plan, but B, as Phil said, it's not written yet.
Well, with the greatest respect, I sat in a very good briefing with Howard Dauber, and he was brilliant in looking at cross-party support. The Mayor of Croydon was there, Jason Perry, equally, who was very involved in the growth plan. So this isn't a partisan point, Richard, despite your sort of flippant response to my question. The point I'm trying to make is, do we not have a price tag? Something doesn't have to be written to have an understanding as to how much you want to spend on it before you get going. So do we not have a rough idea for how much we want to spend on putting this plan together?
So, trying to avoid them being flippant, I think there's a number of outlets. So what do we know? Towards the growth plan document that we published with London councils a couple of months ago. So the growth plan is split down into two main sections, one of which is the stuff around people and talent, of which the major GLA delivery arm is through our existing Adult Skills Fund budget, where we are broadly envisaging that most of that can be funded by shifting the existing resources the GLA has, because we have decentralisation of the Adult Skills Fund. We are clearly talking to government about the nature of that decentralisation at the moment, but finances isn't, we don't think, the main barrier to delivering that. It's about the flexibilities within the rules governing the Adult Skills Fund, because clearly the GLA controls almost £400 million of government funding in that area already, and therefore we think most of that can be delivered from within existing resources. We do want, however, some more flexibilities to deliver the growth fund in that area. The element I think Howard would have briefed you about is more about the economic development half of the growth plan. As Phil said, all the way through this budget document, we haven't labelled them as delivery of the growth plan, because the growth plan, when you look at it about housing, about infrastructure, about economic development, about trade promotion, and a whole range of the other things, is actually so encompassing of quite a lot of what this organisation does. It covers quite a lot of this. There's a lot of money we are committing on things that will be in the growth plan already in this budget, whether it's the LNP funding, whether it's some of the local economic development funding, whether it's creative enterprise. There's a lot of items, and I'm sure we haven't got a list of everything that will be in the growth plan which in front of us, because we don't have a full list of that. However, very large chunks of this budget and very large chunks of growth items within it will end up featuring in the growth plan. What we don't have a sense of yet is where some of the new policy ideas that will come out of the growth plan will land, both because that process hasn't completed yet and because costing of those things takes time. What we need to do is both ensure that they are tied into the any pitch we make into the comprehensive spending review, but also, frankly, we are working with boroughs, with government agencies such as the Research and Development Agency that we had a conversation with through London University a couple of weeks ago, and others, to make sure that we're tying all of London's related funding together, so all of London government is working together to deliver this.
Well, might I suggest, Richard, that you get on with it, quite simply because, Howard and the local government representatives that are working with him cross-party seem to have a very good idea as to what they want to do. I wouldn't say that the growth plan is written, because it isn't, but there's a very good, I'd say it's draft format, which I think is very ambitious for London. Obviously, not everyone will agree with all of it due to various political dispositions. But the point that you hit on with regard to working with local government, trying to deal with 32 London boroughs, as I'm sure the Mayor has discovered over his 8 years, is quite a tricky thing to do, to have a coordinated approach. So I would ask, how far, final question, Chair, how far have you gotten into those discussions as to what the Mayor wants to do with the growth plan and a cross-party consensus in going to government during the settlement period?
Throughout this process, we've been working very closely with London councils and through London councils out into the boroughs to understand what their priorities are for the growth plan, to build that into the developing structure that Howard and Mayor Perry have spoken to you about, and to start, exactly as Richard says, both to start thinking through what the underlying new interventions might be that sit within that, but also to articulate where existing asks, for example, for a multi-year transport settlement, are critical to the delivery of growth within the capital. So there is strong, I think, cross-party agreement around the direction forward here. Laura Citron, who's been leading a lot of the work around the sort of economic development side of this, has been and met every single one of the boroughs across London individually, and we've held a number of briefing events as well as roundtables and conversations with the higher education sector, the business sector, and so on to feed into it. So I think there is a good degree of cross-party consensus, and towards a growth plan document that we discussed with the London Partnership Board was approved by London Council's leaders before it came to that. And I think there is consensus about the direction of travel here. What we need to do now is articulate the detail that sits beneath that, and exactly as you say, feed that into conversations with government. But there are some big chunks of that we absolutely know need to be in place as part of that negotiation, including restitution of UK SPF back to its previous level, or whatever the successor fund for that is, agreeing a sensible multi-year capital deal for transport, agreeing the kind of flexibilities that Richard is talking about for skills provision and the continuation of that budget, and so on.
Sticking with some broad overview questions, Assembly Member Harani.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is to Mary, just on the mandates. So to what extent is this budget underpinned by the new mandates and delivery plan governance arrangements, and how has the new mandate process impacted the 25-26 process?
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Harani. So this budget reflects explicitly the expectations that the Mayor has of the GLA in what he wants to see delivered across the 8 themes. We've kept the same structure as last year. And you'll see under the theme sections, we talk about these 14 high-level strategic programmes. And those are a direct output of the mayor's the process to establish the mayor's requirements of the GLA. So the content of this budget is derives directly from those mandates.
And what are, just on that, so what are the next steps in developing those mandates, and when can we expect further details?
Okay, so as this document makes clear, we are in the middle of that work. So under each of the themes, you see what we're planning to deliver under each of these themes at draft budget stage. Teams, we've got an accountable senior responsible owner for each of these 14 programmes. They are now in the advanced stage of laying out detailed delivery plans for each of the programmes. But I just want to stress this draft budget reflects that early work. And you can expect to see the individual delivery plans being adopted through mayoral decisions starting very soon.
So just in terms of future ways on the budget, when do you think a decision will be made on potentially basing the GLA mayor budget on programmes instead of the themes, the overarching themes that you mentioned?
Well, so we've been open about that in this draft budget. I think we probably won't make a decision about that until January or February, probably. And we wanted to be clear that that's partly what we're thinking. Which way we fall for the final budget, I don't know yet which way we'll fall. We may present it again thematically. We may decide actually it makes much more sense to take a programme basis. And the main reason for that is, and this I hope would have been clear to you, is that each of the 14 programmes, although we've nested each one under a theme, they are largely cross-cutting. And so it's a bit of a simplification of the programmes to sort of just nest them under single themes. But we will go, I think, with whichever feels the best way to present the final budget transparently. And if we do switch tack and move to presenting by programmes, we'll obviously provide the Assembly team with the reconciliation of that switch.
So there's a possibility, are you saying within your final 25-26 presentation, there could be a possibility that's how it will be presented?
Yes, I mean, that's what we've said here, but we have not made a decision either way.
Okay. And Richard, one thing that you mentioned in your opening answers to the questions to Assemblymember Garrett was about structure, and it very much feels to me like a bit of a transition budget, because you spoke of sort of the 1 year funding settlement and then potentially a multi-year settlement, but also we're hearing about the government's approach on missions. And is there anywhere that you're looking to, I mean, it feels like there's some sort of alignment going on structure between the way that you're looking to do things and the way that government is. Can you just report back on that, Richard?
Yes, certainly. And there's two separate elements, and I'll answer on both of them in your question, Assembly Member. So, number one, I think, given we've always been transparent that this was going to be a year where the usual relative high levels of uncertainty, given the frankly, suboptimal nature of having to publish a budget at this point in the municipal cycle that no other public body does because it's so early and we're only doing it as a statutory requirement, means that we have a level of uncertainty, both because of the change in government and because of the fresh mayoral mandate, that goes way beyond the usual levels of uncertainty. We've tried just to be transparent. I mean, appreciate that's not ideal for anyone, but we've tried just to be transparent about that in the budget document. What that has led to is in trying to shift this new way of forcing kind of of changing the GLA's government structures to of which the primary benefit we are already seeing is getting teams from different directorates within the GLA who do work with either the same client groups or on the same kind of challenges, working much more closely together to come up with much more kind of joint solutions to problems. And I can cite examples of that if you want. I think we're seeing genuine fruits from that, and I think that is starting to be reflected in this budget. But as I say, that is a work in progress. So we're giving you a kind of snapshot of progress as we go on that. The challenge around the missions is slightly separate to the GLA budget, and if I can explain that for a second, the London Partnership Board, and again working with London councils on this, because the missions are a kind of are not a mayoral initiative, they're a pan-London government initiative, are designed to kind of really get the operational teams across London working to tackle key questions, working together at pace. So the cross-party decision of the Partnership Board was to set up 6 London missions, which are broadly reflective of the government's 5 national missions, plus having a standalone one on housing delivery, and to pull that out of the National Growth Mission, because obviously housing delivery is such a critical issue for London. The first 3 of those missions, which are growth, housing and health, are being set up at the moment, and we're going to move on to do the next 3 when we've got those 3 going. That's a decision taken jointly between the GLA and London councils based on the kind of the availability of resource to really drive that work at the moment. And their work is going to be about largely using the existing work of both the GLA, but also the boroughs, NHS England, London, and a lot of different public bodies to really coordinate and drive work. So it's not necessarily you will see the missions reflected in the budget, and we're not using them as a basic item of GLA governance, but what they are is a way of London government doing what we all want it to do, and I think that is a cross-party point, of working together more closely to drive the progress that Londoners want to see.
Okay. That's fair. I think separately for the committee, it would be useful to see some of that work, if there's wider London-wide work that's impacting and you know, the GLA is obviously contributing to that. It would be useful to see how that fits in. Thank you.
Definitely. In that case, we return to Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Faye, firstly, congratulations. The draft GLA / Mayor's budget for 25-26 shows a reduction of £155 million in the funding for the GLA and the Mayor's budget compared to 24-25. This is largely driven by lower interest receipts and business rates. What led you or your team to assume they would be lower this year than last year?
So actually one of the core differences between the future budget and the budget from the current year is related to the fact that we've funded free school meals in the 24-25 budget and 25-26 budget. That's a decision we'll probably no doubt be talking about later on today. In terms of the lower reduction of business rates and council tax levels, we've obviously spoken to, or we've done our best estimates based on what knowledge we've got around the business rates and council tax from councils across the boroughs, and that's what's led us to provide those changes in funding levels.
Right, thank you, Faye. Just picking up before I proceed with my other questions on the point that you raised about can you explain what you said about the free school meals, or whatever we're calling it these days, universal free school meals? Because you're saying that is what's thrown off the numbers in this budget, given that we spent the same amount last year. I think David correct, it was around £160 million, something like that. Could you just clarify on that point?
140 million. And obviously, the thing about free school meals is it's done by academic year, and we look at budget by financial year, and that sometimes creates some confusion. So this budget would show the 40 million at the end of the academic year, which falls into the next financial year that we're talking about.
Thank you, David. So following on from your response, Faye, I'm going to ask a hypothetical here in order to make it easier for those that are not political appointees to answer. Let's say hypothetically you had a government that increased national insurance, froze income tax thresholds, and therefore that may have an impact on the number of receipts you receive from business rates. would that therefore not have a possible knock-on effect on this year's budget?
So business rates is dependent on the rateable value of that particular business, and so the association between national insurance rates and rateable value of that business I'm a little bit sort of unclear on. In terms of estimates around rateable values, we look at a number of things. Every year councils do what they can to increase the rateable values, ensuring that the baseline is you know, that they're collecting what they should collect, and the GLA supports councils in doing that. We also look at the level of provisions that we've got in terms of debt recovery, etc. And so I don't overly see a difference between the, the national insurance and rateable value, but we're not anticipating currently a reduction in business rates for next year.
Let me help, Faye. If that business doesn't exist anymore, that you're not getting the revenue in. Right. So with regard to lost revenue, so if we assumed, if it happens to be the case that we have a reduction, which it looks like in the draft budget will do in the number of business rates that the GLA receives, have there been any conversations with government? Because in previous years, not necessarily under this mayoralty, but with some local authorities, there can be a top-up from government if the rateable value and the amount received has gone down significantly. Has there been any sort of assurance, or is it too early to say?
The budget, neither, the Mayor's budget guidance doesn't assume a fall in business rates overall. It assumes an increase of 2%. So the premise of your question isn't right.
I'll happily come back to that in written form, because I disagree with your assessment, David. But I think going back to the point of conversations with government, if there is a drop-off, which there seems to be a disagreement between the both of us, but that's fine, these things happen. Has there been any conversations with government outside of a multi-settlement year for a top-up in funds if needed?
So the way the business rate system works is that authorities are receive the income that they receive under it, with a couple of provisos. One is that any growth they're eligible for above their baseline, the government takes a portion of. And the other is that if the income is lower by 92.5% than their baseline, then at that point the government steps in and compensates. Yeah. So those are the safeguards in place in the current system. We obviously await the billing authorities' returns due at the end of January, which will give us their forecasts for the year ahead, and we will deal with that in the usual way at that point.
Thank you, David. And final question for me, for Faye or for David. If there is a change in the way the government looks at rateable value, of which they've clearly stated that's their ambition, have we modelled or forecasted with some of the things they've said the way that could impact on the amount of receipts or the amount of money that we receive from business rates?
So I can comment on the new financial for 25-26. What generally happens in that instance is we receive Section 31 grants, which compensates for that particular change. Obviously, long term, we know that there's a business rate reset, and we've done modelling around that, but that doesn't affect 25-26 financial year.
Just on that modelling you just said about the longer term impact, obviously one of the things the government has said is that they want to reduce business rates, particularly on things like retail, hospitality, a big part of London's economy. Do we have a sense of what impact that might have on London's business rates? Is that the modelling you were talking about just now, the longer term modelling?
I mean, I think we don't have a sense because it's hugely complicated in the variables. I think the government is consulting about all this now, and it is swings and roundabouts because London has some buildings with very high rateable values. I'm not sure if it's the highest, but certainly one of the very highest is the building, occupied by MHCLG. And the Home Office as an example. So, there are definite swings and roundabouts, and what it matters is more in the sense of growth and where we end up there because obviously our baseline spend is set out, and we've no expectation of our income dropping below that level.
Okay.
But I think, Chair, in terms of your question, if I may, which is I think actually referring to the government's so-called fundamental review of business rates, I think we will.
Yeah, I think they're proposing. I think I saw, was it this week or last week, announcement from the government that they were proposing it. So they've got this temporary interim change, and I think from, is it 2 years hence, a more permanent change.
So there's some of that. I think there was also. I think they've also committed in their manifesto, which clearly we're keeping a weather eye on, have a fundamental look at the system. I think in principle that is to be welcomed. The way that rateable values have gone across the country, London is paying an increasingly, frankly, disproportionate share of the nation's business rate bill. And I don't think that's fair on London businesses. Business rates is the oldest tax in the country because it's very difficult for businesses to hide buildings in the way that they can profits. So, it's difficult to foresee how it fundamentally changes. It's lasted 300 years for a reason, but I think in terms of the overall share of tax paid by ordinary London businesses who aren't owners of their property and don't benefit from the increase in property values, I think actually that we should welcome the fundamental review, provided it doesn't fundamentally undermine funding for London government.
Yes, that would be the swing and the roundabout, wouldn't it? London businesses would benefit from paying less business rates, and then we'd have a hole in our budget that we'd be sitting here discussing how X or Y would be funded.
And I speak as former chair of the LGA Resources Committee. I think that would force, theoretically, that would force effectively to revisit the 2015 Osborne settlement of business rates being the primary source of local and regional government funding, which I don't think has ever been a sensible and has never been a sustainable policy position for the very long term.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that. Just before we now move on to some sections about specifics, one more. It's a broad question. It's a question about a thing that isn't in there. So earlier this calendar year, at the end of the previous budget cycle year, if that's not too confusing a statement, I asked the TfL Commissioner whether he thought that the Mayor's decision on the fares freeze for the current year, the year that we are currently in, meant that for every future year he would effectively receive a cheque from the Mayor for about 123 million pounds to cover that ongoing cost, and he said that was his expectation / understanding. Obviously, that amount isn't in this budget. Is it your understanding that that is an amount that will have to be found through this process?
So, Chair, that's a group budget consideration, and so TfL will set out its assumptions in its budget submission, which is due to be published on Friday, and then obviously in the draft group budget in January, the Mayor will set out his proposals.
But it would be from is it not from the Mayor's funding pot that the Commissioner is expecting him to be made whole for the gap by the fares freeze?
So the funding comes, and let's remind ourselves that it is in the existing live budget. It is shown that funding is being provided at a rate that compounds by inflation. So that absolutely is in the existing live plans at the moment. And that comes from the allocations of business rates that the Mayor makes at group level. And obviously in that process, the Mayor is deciding between how much to give to TfL, how much to give to the Fire Brigade, how much to give to the GLA Mayor budget itself. And so that the Mayor sets out his proposals on that in January. But for now, the working assumption is that we continue with that funding in future years.
So is that a yes? Yes, the assumption is...
the assumption's still there. We do the draft budget in January, and you'll read it and you'll see either, well, that assumption carries on, or no, it doesn't. I'm trying not to preempt something that hasn't been written yet.
Understood. Sorry, did I... Well, we're about to move on to another section, so if you've got something on the broad thing... No? OK, in that case, we move on to our first topic, which is social justice, which is Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Sunday, I'm going to move to you on social justice. What drove the reallocation of specialist housing and services from the housing theme to the social justice theme?
Thank you for that question. So I think it's worth setting out that social justice and equalities runs across all the work the GLA does. And part of the housing, what is the Housing Directorate's delivery was tackling homelessness, domestic abuse, and so on and so forth. As we moved towards a more programmatic approach and started to think about themes, it made sense for those to sit in the social justice themes because they weren't necessarily about house building as such or delivery of housing, but more about people and how we support the most vulnerable.
How does that, so with that amount of housing sitting with the social justice theme, how does that work with governance, and how do you, I mean, I can see why that change has happened and why that would work well, but does that then give sort of enough space to also facilitate all the other social justice activity? Because I know housing can, I mean, quite rightly, it can take over, and so many of these cases and so many of these issues are just very heavy. Is there the capacity, and is there enough space for the rest of the social justice activity to continue?
Yeah, 100%. So it's worth also pointing out that although we do sit in separate directorates, it's kind of porous anyway. There was lots of crossover. So the homelessness team, the rough sleeping team, the domestic abuse team often worked with teams that sat within my directorate, particularly migration, because a lot of those very vulnerable Londoners that we are supporting in migration also have the same issues in terms of domestic violence, rough sleeping, and so on and so forth. So this really, I would say, embeds that and firms it up. In terms of governance, what we have done this year, and it's working very well, is we've set up, I think Mary mentioned it earlier, what we call a single responsible owner for delivery of certain programmes. So the single responsible owner of supporting and accommodation support for vulnerable people also covers the migration work as well. And I think from very early on observations, which I have no reason to believe are false dawns, as it were, it's actually working really well because people who sit in my directorate have contacts beyond and are bringing those in and that expertise in. And those who are sitting in the Housing Directorate are getting the full benefit, as we are, of their work. So we're hoping as we start to develop these programmes in the upcoming months that we can get greater crossover.
Thanks for that explanation. I can see how the work of councils and other bodies could benefit from this learning, because if you have a single responsible owner working through the different responsibilities in the different directorates, it really makes sense. I really look forward to seeing how this develops. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we move on to our second topic, which is environment and climate, with Assemblymember Polanski.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, all. Phil, could I ask, what is the Energy Enablers and Accelerators programme, and what will be the key deliverables from the programme for 25 to 26?
The Energy Enablers and Accelerators programme is essentially the technical support that we provide to functional bodies within the GLA group and to London's wider public sector to develop predominantly carbon reduction projects. It could also be applied potentially to climate adaptation projects as well, to move them from being early stage proposals to being investable propositions. And the idea is that through that work, we both get them to a position where they are in a better place to apply for government funding through schemes in particular the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund, but also to generate the pipeline of projects that might be funded both through the current Green Finance Fund, through any other funds that are set up through the London Climate Finance Facility, and through private sector green finance initiatives. So we are seeking to support projects to the point where they are investable.
Thank you, that's clear. Can I move to the GLA Group PPAs for power purchase agreements that would cost £50 million, but it says as an estimate they would generate cash savings of £41 million. How was this estimate arrived at?
I have to say I would have to go back and look in and seek some detailed information from my team about exactly how that is arrived at. But essentially, the calculation around the PPA is that by switching from variable energy provision provided through the market over a significant period of time, they're often let for 20 to 30 years, to an agreed price over that period. So you're taking yourself away from market fluctuations. You would generate a saving over the longer term. So while you would seek to purchase the energy that you are purchasing over that period for 50 million, the calculation, which inevitably will have some uncertainty around it, I would imagine would be that if you bought that on the open market over a similar period of time, it would be closer to 90 million. I mean, that would be the central estimate within a range, but that gives us some idea of the potential savings that might be generated through that route. So there is a cost in terms of the PPA, but we think that cost would be lower than the cost of purchasing that energy through other routes if you get the structures right.
Yeah, so the principle makes total sense around the PPA. Would you be able to write to us, sort of a committee, with that detailed information, just because the numbers are particularly interesting?
I'm sure we will be able to do that, yes.
Thank you very much. And then can I ask how the relationship of this to the TfL PPAs, because I think they've assumed to be cost neutral?
I think I'm not close to the TfL PPAs because they've been run through another process. I mean, again, I think it may depend upon the timescales for the length of time for the TfL PPAs, the nature of the way in which the energy is procured. TfL clearly has particular requirements in terms of stability of energy provision and so on, given its responsibilities for running the network. So there may be changes, there may be different objectives for the TfL PPA which affect the way in which those calculations work. But again, we can provide some more information on that.
That information would be great, because I find it confusing if they're two different timescales, because you're not quite comparing like for like. It would just be helpful to see them both modelled up close against each other. Thank you. Now, the budget sadly sees some environment investment programmes end, and in capital there's only the Green Finance Fund from 25 to 26 for capital investment. There's also talk about streamlining. What is the overall vision for getting the scale of investment environment work? So I'm talking adaptation, biodiversity, mitigation, obviously, to meet that suggested £280 million a year in the capital strategy from 2029.
The vision is a combination of three things. I would say it is through government funding. While there was a period of uncertainty as we went through a change of government about the scale of funding that might be available. The recent announcements around Warmer Homes Local and Warmer Homes Social have shown the scale of ambition, an increasing scale of ambition, a larger sums of money coming through the system, and better set up funds. We hope. It appears that they are longer term and have more flexibility in terms of how they might be used from what we have seen so far. So in the first instance, accessing those more significant government funds to deploy, to promote retrofit, to promote estates decarbonisation and so on. Obviously, also the TfL multi-year settlement is critical within this, because transport decarbonisation is a key part. So there's a government route. There is then leveraging the Mayor's finance capability to bring in additional private finance. We've seen, a first move in that direction with the establishment of the London Edge Fund, which combines 50 million of mayoral finance capacity with 50 million of private finance capacity provided by Sustainable Development Capital Limited. But that's only the first step in that journey, and a lot of the work in terms of the development of the London Climate Finance Facility is going to be looking at how we can leverage greater amounts of private capital. And the third, of course, is about using our convening powers, using our regulatory powers, in particular through the London Plan, to ensure that private investment and private development is properly taking the need to decarbonise the economy and London's built environment and London society into account as those decisions are made.
In terms of accountability, obviously Solar Together was an example of this going wrong. I suppose I'm asking the similar questions that Alex Georgiou, Assemblymember Georgiou, in terms of leveraging that government money. Where are those conversations at? I don't know if I'm going to get a different answer from you.
Solar Together was a slightly different because, of course, that wasn't government funding.
Of course,
that was a group purchasing model. So actually, there was very little public funds going into that beyond the marketing costs and so on. But in terms of those conversations with government around their future grant programmes, particularly for domestic retrofit, which is where we have some more clarity about what's proposed. Those are ongoing. They're being undertaken jointly between ourselves and London councils because we want to move to a model in which we work together and we coordinate across the London public sector to deliver retrofit more effectively, rather than each different organisation being responsible for a tiny piece of the jigsaw and not being able to see how the whole thing works together. What we are seeing with the with the government's proposals that we've seen so far for Warmer Homes Local is that they are moving to an allocation model rather than a competitive bidding model, which is something that we really welcome. We will just be arguing for London to get a proportionate share of that funding through those allocations, and we will be seeking to make the case that we can deploy that effectively.
Thank you. And finally, from me, can you provide an update on the latest round of applications for the Green Finance Fund?
We have. I can't provide an update on the call for applications that is open at the moment because it's still open. My understanding is through previous calls we have had. I'm just in the time. I will have to go back. I will double check that and we'll have to write you if I've got these slightly wrong. But I believe we've had 68 applications come through in total. Of those, 38 are not yet being progressed through the system, but we're pointing those again towards the energy enablers and accelerators to enable them to get to the point where they are investable propositions. We've got 30 which we've been looking at in detail, and of those 30, 10 have had finance agreed to them.
Okay, great. And again, if you could write to the committee with the confirmed information, that would be great.
I can confirm that, and also we have just recently published our first sort of update report for the Green Finance Fund and the Climate Facility. So there's a lot of information available online, and we can provide you with the link to that.
Thank you very much, Phil. Thanks, Chair.
Sounds good. I look forward to seeing it. So next, Assemblymember Hall.
Hi, thank you. Phil, these for you. I'm very thrilled that you are getting all these bids in, and hopefully you're successful. But then I looked at some of these key level 2 unfunded measures, and to my uneducated eye, they do look expensive. So if you could give me some, or give us some ballpark figures of the following. One of them is all social and fuel poor owner-occupied homes under EPC-B, and there's about 500,000 of those, I believe, in London, retrofit by 2030. So how much ballpark figure have you got for that?
Pardon me. I don't have a ballpark figure off the top of my head for each of those individually.
No,
for the set of unfunded measures, the large-scale unfunded measures in that table D, you would be looking at about 13 billion over the period to 2030 to make those happen. You would never expect all of that money to come from the mayor. But it does give an indication of the scale of challenge that is associated with decarbonising London's built environment.
Yeah, but if you've come up with a total figure,
yeah,
you must have the individual figures in order to add up.
I'm sure we do have the individual figures. I'm sorry, I don't have those to hand. I can try and find them out for you.
Well, I really would like to know, because if you get a certain amount of money, it would be nice for us to see where you've specifically put that.
Yes.
Or is this a whole table of a wish list that, you know, my grandchildren would send to Father Christmas? You know, I wish to have this, but it's never going to happen.
So shall I answer that question? Because I think
if you've got the answer,
yeah.
Yes.
So the aim of this table is, as we have done, and I think, you know, welcome Assemblymember Polanski's thoughts on this as well. We all agree London, I think, needs to get to net zero. There may be discussion around the timetable for that, but the direction of travel, I think, is a consensus point. What we are now setting out as part of our work towards this is what the scale of the challenge is across the city.
Exactly. That's why I'm asking for the figures.
And we have to start, and Phil has said he will write to you with the precise figures of each
Do
thing.
you know the figures?
I don't off the top of my head.
That's
no.
okay then.
But I think,
no, that's fine. I just want the figures.
Okay.
I know your ambition, and ambition's great, but we all know that these things have got to be paid for.
Yes.
If you don't know how much it's going to cost, who knows? It might be affordable, it might not be. And that's what... David Bellamy, you know the answer to everything. Do you know these specific figures? I've got great faith in him. He does know the answer to most things.
No, I'm sorry, I'm afraid I don't have that
David,
breakdown.
you've let me down badly.
Because, you know, like, as a point, I think a point of consensus between us, yeah, these are not. This is not sums that are in the budget that the mayor is allocating. As Phil said, this is going to be about, in large part, about getting private finance in there, and that's why the point about social retrofit and the work with London councils is so important.
We all get that, but we all also understand you can't have no figures around these. We've got to know, if it's a big thing, we've got to know which each is going to cost.
And if we'd known you were going to ask, we'd have had the figures and we'd have told you, but we didn't predict that question. Sorry.
Well, yeah, it is a budget and performance meeting. But anyway, I look forward, really look forward to having that list sent to me then, Phil. Thank you very much.
Assemblymember Harani.
Thank you. I just want to ask a specific question on flood defences to Phil, and just ask if there's any budget that's been ring-fenced or allocated to work on establishing plans for the new Thames barrier.
There isn't a ring-fenced budget for work on the Thames barrier, but it is recognised in our planning for how we would use the overall budget on climate adaptation. In truth, there shouldn't be a significant cost to the GLA in terms of work on that, because it is an environment agency asset. The Environment Agency recognises that it will approach the renewal point. From my previous role, from my previous job, I believe that was around 2050. So the work is beginning at the moment. We want to be engaged with that. We want to be supporting it. We have an ongoing relationship with the Environment Agency, and we're involved in the groups that they're setting up to work on that. But I wouldn't want the GLA to be picking up the bill for doing the analysis or wider work around that. But we need the staff time in place to be able to support that and make sure that they recognise the mayor's objectives in that process.
Okay, that's fine.
Assemblymember Georgiou.
That's fine, it's been answered, thank you.
In that case, Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you. So, Phil, you've detailed, obviously, we've talked a bit about the transition to net zero. One of the key elements of that is obviously delivering a circular economy. You've allocated £351,000 in the draft budget towards that. Can you tell us a bit more about how that is envisaged to be spent to achieve our statutory targets, but also how you're looking to use Re-London in order to achieve those goals?
And again, like other areas, ultimately the mayor's spending power is not the strongest power that the mayor has in this area. He has statutory powers around waste and recycling by local authorities. We have the relationship with Re-London, which provides advice and support both to local authorities and to the private sector around their circular economy goals. But critically, what we can do, as in a number of other areas, is develop the evidence base to show how this can be worked. We work closely with Re-London on that, but there are some areas where the GLA can take forward work directly, and then convene partners to show how that can be achieved. And I think it is important to say that emission, when we're looking at the overall challenge around decarbonisation, emissions from waste in London are a very small percentage of that. So we don't put the same amount of resources into that area for that reason as we do into buildings decarbonisation or transport decarbonisation, but we do seek to use the powers that we have as effectively as possible.
Of course, I mean, that transition to net zero and achieving a circular economy also brings in our convening powers and our ability to make progress as a real catalyst driver for that transition here in London. So are there any, you talked about programmes, are there any specific programmes that you're looking to achieve through the £350,000 that's allocated there?
Critically, around the £350,000, I mean, I think it's predominantly about the development of the evidence base, which we can then use to support our engagement with local authorities about their waste and recycling plans. We have also in the past provided funding, including through some of the UK SPF programmes that we fund to support businesses to move more to a circular model. We've both provided funding for Re-London to do that, but also, for example, to the British Fashion Council to support fashion businesses to move to more circular models. We would like to continue that work, but obviously that's dependent on sort of future funding levels and exactly how those are deployed.
That sounds really positive. I'd look forward to seeing some more detail on that. And just a final quick question from me in terms of on the food front. So what budget, if anything, will be allocated to the Capital Growth Programme going forward, and will funding be provided to Sustain going forward, and will that be going up?
I don't know the answer to that. I think we look at food waste through our waste and recycling programmes.
So this isn't about food waste, which obviously is very much with the local authorities in terms of the rollout of the provision, making sure that's separate to collection with garden waste, etc. But this is about food growth within the borough and within London, and support through the Capital Growth Programme and for Sustain.
I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid.
If you could write to me.
Yeah, thank you.
Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you. Assembly Member Mahfouz pretty much just asked it, but Phil, I just want to come at it one more time. So when the Mayor before mandates, it felt like there were lots of areas that he was taking responsibility for that weren't necessarily directly in his power, but still as Mayor of London recognised the important role. I think food is a really good example where the links with the climate crisis and food security are really, really clear, along with social justice angles too in terms of the food growing projects. This kind of restriction now to mandates sounds like some of those programmes are in danger, or at least sound like they're not being protected in the same way. Can I ask if this assessment's right?
I mean, I think it is important to say, in terms of, I don't know about Sustain specifically, in terms of, as you say, sort of local growing programmes, food programmes, we have provided a fair bit of support for that through grant programmes like the Grow Back Greener Fund and some of our other kind of local and the Future Neighbourhoods programme and some of our sort of more locally focused environment grant schemes. I would expect those benefits to still be available as we move to the Green Routes Fund, which we're in the process of developing at the moment, which is how we're trying to sort of the route through which we're hoping to streamline some of those and do better. There is inevitably going to be some prioritisation as we move into the mandates process, and we try and get, deliver the strongest benefits for London that we can do. But I wouldn't say that. But in prioritising, we need to look at all of the areas all of the objectives that we're trying to achieve to make sure that we are achieving the right priorities.
Sorry, can I add to that? Because there's some information that Phil wouldn't have because it doesn't sit in his directorate. So I think I have to declare something of an interest as an ex-senior employee of Sustain. So I think my quick answer to your question is no, I don't accept that premise. Right. We still have a senior food policy expert sat in our central strategy and intelligence team who does a lot, is a kind of acknowledged expert on working across to develop links with all of these people. I don't know about our plans for funding capital growth, but I don't recall us putting money into that for a while. But obviously, we have ways of supporting that kind of work. The whole point around the kind of themes work, of which mandates were a small part of that, is that we are moving to better coordinate our delivery across different bits of the GLA rather than have it more siloed. But the GLA is a strategic regional authority with actually a very small direct budget. I mean, all of this budget, remember, is less than I used to spend on adult social care as a council leader before I came here. Is trying to use that money strategically to get the most leverage for London. I have always challenged whether some of that is individual small grant schemes or some of the trying to move to more strategic programs like Green Routes, which looks at greening, promoting the natural environment, potentially food growing solutions to that, and all sorts of other things as well. I think we get better bang for very limited buck for moving to smaller, bigger programs, having lots of tiny little things, and that's broadly the strategic approach that we've taken to this kind of quite big shift that I've been working on for a while in GLA governance.
I think Sustain's argument back, though, and I've heard Sarah make this, is that a lot of the time capital growth are the only people doing this work, and they go, if we're not doing it and we're not around to do it, this work will just fall through the cracks. I think in terms of London history, it was Ken Livingstone under Green Environment Mayor Jenny Jones who pushed for a London Food Board and for the Mayor to start taking responsibility for food. But now I'm hearing Phil talk about prioritisation and delivering best for Londoners. But in a climate crisis, food security is clearly going to be a huge issue for Londoners.
Oh, 100%. But I think the reason there is a slight incongruity between the two positions you set out is what Phil is talking about is some of our programmatic work, which looks at big chunks of work. If people want to put in a food growing bid to the Green Routes Fund, obviously I can't prejudice that process, but I would imagine be wholly in scope for that kind of grant funding regime. I know Sarah well. I talk to her about these kind of things on and off because I see all I see a number of ex-colleagues socially. But I think the broad thrust of our work in all of this kind of stuff is actually to, food is the classic issue that sits across environment, it sits across social justice, it sits across employment rights, it sits across a whole range of the work we do, and that's why we shifted responsibility for this to the City Intelligence Unit a couple of years ago, so it better sits across all of what the GLA does rather than sit in one particular directorate and be limited by that.
So you don't anticipate, I guess, in the Mayor's question time in 2 years, if I ask the Mayor something about a food growing programme, he wouldn't say, effectively not my circus. That's nothing to do with me.
So there's two separate elements, isn't it? The Mayor doesn't have a statutory duty to drive the food system. Clearly, no one in this country does. It's one of the big things that was identified in the 2009 Foresight report, thinking back to my days at Sustain. However, we have historically done work in this area, and we carry on doing work in this area because it's a key part of our contribution and a whole range of work. Will we have a specific food growing funding programme? As I say, I can't remember us having had that for a while, but we will have specific big funding programmes around Green Routes that will be looking at broadly this kind of area. And people are welcome to submit bids to that fund when it's launched.
And it's a key part. I'll take that. Thank you very much.
Make an observation about statutory duty to supply things. Nobody has a statutory duty to supply food, but the shops seem to be full of it. Lots of people have a statutory duty to supply housing, and we have a shortage and a crisis, would be my observation about socialism. Anyway, moving on to our next section, health with Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. My questions to Tunde. Funding for the health theme is due to fall from 4.2 million in 24-25 to 1.7 million in 25-26. So can you tell me what's causing that and what impact will it have on the objectives of the health theme?
Thank you. So it's worth pointing out again that our approach to health, which is stewarded by the Public Health Unit, is that we have a health in all policies approach. So we have a public health unit that we fund that actually business partners with the whole of the GLA group to ensure that we do not do any harm with our policies, and then we positively promote good health across the GLA group. When we were putting together the themes, we noted that because we take a preventative, a public health approach, in terms of our interventions on health, we tend to go upstream and look at the determinants of poor health. And the determinants of poor health are inequalities, structural inequalities. So therefore, we moved a lot of our health delivery into the social justice theme. So I think the quantum hasn't changed that much. It's been more of a shifting of the deck chairs. Likewise, we've never had a sort of children and young people theme that looked at children and young people in the round, although, within my directorate we have a children and young people section. So a lot of the work that we did on healthy schools, super zones and various other things also moved to the children and young people theme. So although it looks on paper that health spend has reduced, it's actually probably broadly stayed the same. It's been more of a moving around of where it sits.
Yeah, moving the deck chairs is what makes it so difficult for us to constantly scrutinise, because we're not scrutinising the same thing. Quite clever, I would, if you were really cynical, I would suggest.
Member, that's why you'll find a table that shows these changes in Appendix C. So it's
nevertheless,
there for you.
Nevertheless, it's shifting sands, David, and you know it. If we every year were looking at the same sort of thing, we'd know, we could tell properly. But as it is, I think shifting deck chairs, as Tunde put it, is actually very accurate. So that 60% cost reduction is actually going somewhere else.
Indeed.
Okay. I'll keep my thoughts to myself, Chairman.
On that bombshell, Assembly Member Hirani.
Thank you, Chair. And to Tunde as well, just on mental health and wellbeing and the Healthy Place, Healthy Weight, because on this committee, as well as budget, we're also interested in performance as well. So it had objectives to be achieved by the end of 2025. And do you know where we are with those objectives?
So the healthy weight, healthy mind. So this is part of the health inequalities strategy. I will have to get back to you on that. I don't have those the objectives or the figures to hand at the moment, but I'm happy to write back to you as to where we got with that. We certainly are at this moment in time looking forward and scoping what we're going to be doing in the future. And as you know, the Mayor has a statutory duty to have a health inequality programme. We've got four areas that we want to concentrate on, which is healthy hearts, which is tackling cardiovascular disease and particularly how it plays out in terms of inequalities. Healthy minds, which is going to be looking at how we support good mental health. Healthy place, which is tackling how the public and commercial realm can support and encourage good health. And then healthy communities, which is really about tackling those structural inequalities and wider determinants of poor health. So we are scoping out that work. I will certainly be able to write back to you and tell you how we've been doing on those missions.
If you could, I think that would be good if you can get back to us on the specifics. But also, I think in the last year there's been new announcements that will definitely impact the health inequality strategy. So it'll be interesting to see how that's reflected. Just thinking about mental health, there's been quite a few announcements on mentoring, for example, probably more associated with the prevention of crime and ASB aspect and youth services, but it definitely has an impact on mental health and well-being as well. So I think it'll be worth hearing from you also about whether you're due a refresh of the strategy and what the timelines are for that.
So we are scoping that, as I said, at the moment. I think you're absolutely right in terms of mental health. A piece of work that the team have been looking at is mental health for young people. You know, from our research and from research that's out there, it's been driven primarily by lots of factors. The pandemic has undoubtedly, and lockdown has undoubtedly caused lots of issues with our young people. There's academic pressures as well. That's been causing impact. What we're getting through from all of our research as well is what a thing called megatrends, which some of you may or may not have heard on, but this is the social media aspect and what young people are seeing, which is causing them anxiety. We're aware that the government has also stated that it wishes to tackle mental health in schools. We want our work to complement that. So again, we are scoping out what that could be, what gaps there are, how we're going to support that going forward, and I'm happy to come back, or members of my team will come back and explain how that work is progressing.
I think so, because one of the other areas you mentioned was Healthy Hearts at the beginning in your response to me, and I know the NHS are planning a major campaign on Healthy Hearts next year, so not necessarily the work that will impact Londoners will be delivered directly by the GLA, but supported by the Public Health Unit. But there will be other things that happen externally that I think you need to really incorporate in the inequalities strategy. So I think your thoughts in writing on those objectives, but also on how you're going to fit in all the stuff that's happening externally would be welcome to this committee.
Sure.
If I
just come back very quickly, that's absolutely right. We are actually looking at our public access defibrillators program, which we in the last 2 years we put a defibrillator in every TfL tube station. We're now extending that, particularly in areas where we know people. Communities that are more disproportionately poorly affected by poor heart health, which is usually the black communities and South Asian communities. We're looking at how we can put defibrillators there. Last year, TfL, or over the last 2 years, TfL said that the defibrillators were used 58 times, and we know from our own research that when they're used, particularly soon after a heart attack, it actually has big impacts on saving lives.
Thanks. Don't see anyone else indicating, so if we move on to our fourth section, which is on skills, with Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. In timely fashion, we've got the children entering as I talk about skills for the future. So we heard some of the Chair's maths earlier today. I think actually the result, it's, the situation with our chronic housing shortage and so on actually has been the result of 14 years of conservatism, but we can probably agree to disagree on that one. But on a more serious note, in terms of funding programmes, we've seen the Multiply programme obviously roll out and support a number of people with those key basic foundational skills going forward. As I understand it, that's not going to be funded going forward. So what alternative funding are you seeking to achieve to continue that sort of programme, and what do you feel that the impact will be of that decision?
So you're right, the Multiply, the government hasn't confirmed Multiply will continue. It's likely that it will not, given some of it came out of UK SBF or funding and so on and so forth, was top sliced by the last administration and put into Multiply. Before I answer the question properly, it's worth pointing out that part of our ASF funding also looks after numeracy. What we have found in the lessons learned from Multiply is that it was very successful because it didn't just look at numeracy, it looked at the fear of numeracy that lots of people have, rather than just teach numeracy. And that encouraged a whole lot of people who probably have a bit of that gremlin on their shoulder, that they're not good at maths or numbers, to come forward and do the work and take part in the courses. Going forward, I think Richard spoke earlier about our conversations with government. We are looking for flexibilities in our total adult education spend. And that will allow us to look at what London needs bespokely and allocate within the parameters of priorities, allocate accordingly. Also, one of the things that we've seen is year-on-year funding stops providers from adequately planning ahead. So again, as part of a settlement from government, we are hoping and hearing good noises of a multi-year settlement, which will also support our ability to continue with some of these numeracy courses, but also what they call the softer skills, what I call the higher order learning of getting that confidence back so that you can operate.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the programme firsthand, and I think it makes a huge impact. And clearly, as you say, Tunde, for people who just have that overall fear of sort of what numbers means and so on, and actually seeing people firsthand trying out the course and so on, and the impact it's had on their confidence and their ability to take that forward. In terms of the ASF funding that we've got at the moment, it's distributed across London boroughs in a certain funding pattern, which does seem to not necessarily meet our sort of fairness criteria from what I can see. There are some boroughs that have far more per capita funding than others. What's your understanding as to why that is and whether that will be reviewed going forward?
I think Richard wants to come in, and I'll...
So, I mean, I think the key thing to answer that question is that there is a borough-by-borough analysis, but this is not funding that's distributed by borough, it's funded by institution. There are lots of institutions, particularly in these days, of merged college supergroups, where the mobility of young people, particularly in post-16 education, is so high that the borough the institution is based in is not a great indicator of the borough that the learners are living in. So I don't think borough analysis is actually that useful an insight into this spending. You know, when I was a governor of City and Islington College in my previous life, we had learners from every single London borough and most of the surrounding boroughs outside Greater London as well. So money that nominally went to an institution with an Islington postcode was actually servicing learners from across London. So we are... the key for me in all of this is, as Tunde said, is in getting the flexibilities. But actually, I think that kind of borough-based geographical analysis is exactly why you need strategic London commissioning of this fund, because it has to work on a pan-London basis, because the whole of the post-16 system works on a pan-London basis, and probably slightly beyond as well.
And just on that theme, I guess, Richard, and maybe for yourself, Tunde or Phil, but just in terms of clearly there's a gap in the skill set that we are looking to fill through this programme to make sure that employers have potential future employees from London who are in well-paid jobs, doing the sorts of jobs that will support the London economy to grow. How are we making sure that we're aligning the funding that we've got to and the skills programmes that are on offer with that ambition?
Shall I kick off then? Tunde may want to follow. So that is harder than it should be under the current funding rules, which we inherited from the Skills Funding Agency and are currently nationally mandated. And that's exactly the conversation we mean when we say we need the flexibilities in this funding, because at the moment we are stuck on a learner-led funding model that if that college inevitably incentivises colleges to provide courses that learners want to go on, because that's how they get the money, well, actually the courses that London's economy needs. So the conversation we're currently in at the moment, I think London is doing groundbreaking work on all of this, is looking at how we start to shift our funding system to be based more on what our economy needs rather than on where we've been. And I think it's not just the fault of the previous government, because Labour launched into this as well in the kind of Blair and Brown years. But we've got ourselves into a funding system which actually isn't strategically directable in the way in which actually we think it should be. So we are learning at the moment from Ireland, who've got, I think, probably the best system in Europe for this, called SkillsNet, and actually some of the people who developed that system are now advising us on this, of how you get a skills funding system that is much more in tune with driving the needs of our economy. But that's exactly why we are having those conversations with government on the rules attached to the ASF, because we are not able to make the shifts we want if the rules attached to it don't change.
I'll just add with a little bit of more granular detail. So currently there's entitlements that we have to follow, which means that particularly for level 2 and above, if you do not have a formal qualification, you are funded. That takes up the bulk of our ASF spending. I think it's 305 million that spends on that. Of course, we still want to continue working, but a lot of these basic skills qualifications are just basic skills and they're not linked to employment. So again, we're looking at how, as Richard said, how we can move to a much more employer-led model, not just in skills, but also across the piece of the whole ecosystem, employment, support and careers.
And I think it's fair to say, actually, that there is a lot of, given we are doing the cutting-edge thinking, I think there's a lot of interest in this. When you hear talk in the budget document, no doubt through some of these papers as well, about talk of a single settlement for London, some of that, if we end up replicating what's already being discussed by the previous government for the West Midlands and Greater Manchester, some of that flexibilities and long-term certainty that Tunde refers to, that's exactly what we mean by that single settlement negotiations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that we're now moving on to our next section, which is children and young people. And just before we start on that, very appropriately, if I could welcome to the chamber. Hello, good morning, everyone. We have the school council from Harris Primary Academy, Crystal Palace in Bromley. So good morning, welcome. And we are about to have a discussion about what the Mayor is doing for children and young people. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. It's gratifying to see that the Mayor's continuing his enthusiasm for adopting Lib Dem policies in continuing with free school meals for primary-aged children. It would have been nicer to have got some detail, I should say, in the papers before us, rather than having to learn it from the Daily Mirror this morning. How much is next year's commitment going to cost, and how much will the full 4 years cost, given that the Mayor has given the commitment that this will happen throughout his entire time as Mayor?
So, as David alluded to earlier, the cost for universal free school meals will be allocated in the group budget process that's going to come up, because forgive me, Gareth, this is the first time you've looked at these papers, but we'll deal with it in exactly the same way that we have for the previous 2 years as well, which is the whole of the Mayor's budget is £130 million here. We think universal free school meals will cost £140 million next year. So even if we canned everything else that we did, the universal free school meals will never be met from the GLA Mayor budget. It will always be a group budget matter, and therefore we will announce that funding when we publish the group budget papers in due course.
So we're expecting it to cost exactly the same this coming year as it cost last year, given inflation, all of the extra costs?
Broadly, yes. There was a very significant, there was a big increase in the rate per funding between year 1 and year 2. Obviously, the inflation is now reduced, and we've done the modelling of that, but we broadly anticipate this costing the same to the GLA next year as it did last. That's based on some of our expectations, the fact that some capital requirements have been met already now, about to be 3 years into the programme. It's also based on the fact that 2 years in we can start, actually, I think, to model things better and have a better and the take-up rate across London is kind of settled now, so which is broadly 87%, I think, which is a kind of, having run this in Islington, is kind of what I would have anticipated, is kind of where we got to, having run this for many years. So I think that feels about right. So again, it just gives us two years in, I think we can really start to model down a kind of better estimate of the cost. So there'll be fewer it's safe at this point to put less contingency into the budget for it.
Okay, and last time round we looked at some from general reserve, some from the Transport Services Reserve Fund, which was no longer needed. Where will we be looking at, probably first and foremost, for budget this time around?
Yeah. So as Richard says, Assembly Member, it's not something that substantively the GLA Mayor budget has the resources to do, and so that is something that we will be dealing with in the group budget from the total income sources available to the Mayor there, and so we will set that out in the draft budget in January.
Okay. It feels slightly ringing the prayer, but as I say, I'm new to this. I'm sure that other Assembly members will have further comment later on. Just slightly tangentially, and this could easily come under economy questions, but the Mayor's prioritising the Erasmus programme for Erasmus-style international exchange programme for Londoners, not dissimilar to the one which we suggested as part of the budget last year. Will this be happening this year, and if so, how is it going to be funded, and when will the programme begin?
So the Mayor's commitment is to explore the establishment of that scheme. That exploration is currently going on. We've commissioned Bloomberg Associates to do that, and they're going to report back in the new year.
Excellent. Okay. I don't think I have any further, Chair.
Okay. Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you very much. This morning we've seen the release of a publication which shows the evaluation of the free school meals programme so far. What have you found from that report, Richard?
Thank you, Assembly Member. I could just read you out a press release, but I think I'll save everyone's time by referring you to the website. Look, in broad terms, the scheme has been enormously successful. Clearly that there have been some learning points, but for a scheme established at pace, I want to pay enormous tribute both to the GLA team who've been doing this. It was taken from the kind of keen people from across the organisation, and particularly to London's school leaders who've gone really, and the boroughs who've all worked incredibly well to implement it. We've seen top-line impacts of school of parents reporting that is clearly had a significant impact on family finances, that kids are reporting that behaviour in their class are better and that they personally feel better able to learn because they're less hungry in the afternoons, about kids' diet being broadened and people have more experience of kind of fresh fruit and veg, so there's kind of head schools reporting on kind of calmer learning communities, better so I think broadly given free school meals was already an evidence-based policy which had been piloted before, and we'd seen quite really positive evaluation results from previous pilots and from London's boroughs such as Islington, Southwark, Newham and others who had already started to do this work, that it's everything when we roll it out at a greater scale, all the benefits that we hoped we would see based on previous evidence, we are now seeing citywide.
It's incredibly positive to hear, and certainly I think from the report, if I pulled out, I think it was 84% of parents who said that it helped financially, 31% of parents who said that it helped. We talked earlier about children's mental health, and actually that has that's been evident on that. I was at my old primary school earlier in the term and spoke to the head teacher, the deputy head, and a number of children who were incredibly positive about the programme, and I'm sure we could probably get a cheer from the young people in the crowd about free school meals. Can we? Yeah? But what yeah. But so Richard, what's been the feedback from parents, from children, from teachers about this huge impact of the universal free school meals since it's been introduced?
I think the point of us directly commissioning some independent evaluation results, one of which coincidentally was published this morning, that wasn't the plan, is to hear objectively from all of those people. So the Institute of Urban Health, which is an independent health charity linked to some of our big foundation trust hospitals, has published this report based on surveys of teachers, based on surveys of parents. Again, I won't take up the committee's time by rereading all of the results, but I think actual results of the evaluation speak for themselves. We're going to hear more from some further bits of evaluation, either that we have commissioned or that have been commissioned because there's such national interest in this as a kind of large-scale trial of a very promising policy from Sutton Trust and others, so later in the year too. So we've designed and actually worked with the Cabinet Office, both under the previous government and this government, to design a evaluation programme for this that has got the kind of credibility and therefore is being listened to in kind of across the kind of evidence community in this.
That's fantastic to see, and it's, as you say, evidence-based in terms of rollout, but also in terms of this evaluation. So the country will be looking more widely as to the impact potentially of rolling this out across the country. Are you happy, Chair, for me to move on to the next section? Or no. No? OK.
Assembly member, that's very stern, wasn't it? I didn't mean it to come across like that. I've got two more people who will come in and want to come in on this section. Assembly member Georgiou.
Richard, I won't be using my time like Assemblymember Foos to bid for a deputy mayoral job. With regard to, you touched on navigating some of the capital expenditure points that came with Free School Meals at the beginning in the first year. It was widely reported, mind you, it won't surprise you to know that I don't read the Mirror. Given that at the time it was suggested it cost about £30 million, some of the schools were concerned about capital expenditure. Can you talk about if there were issues and how we navigated those moving forward over the last 2 years?
Certainly. So I don't recognise the 30 million capital figure. In the main, there weren't the issues that there could have been when we rolled this out. So primarily, that's why I want to pay tribute to London school leaders who've just, like, as they have done with many challenges over the last few years, have coped with this kind of admirably in quite a big change. The evaluation report points to a range of changes that schools made to accommodate the fact that the number of year 3 to 6 kids taking school lunches on average doubled. That's the kind of change. So the change we're actually talking about is for junior schools, probably a doubling of the number of kids taking free school meals from about 40-something% to about 80-something%. So for you're probably talking then about 60 to 70 extra bodies in the thing. So we're talking about sometimes where dining halls are small, about moving to double shifts and that kind of thing. There's been better investment in school crockery, more kids sometimes kind of shifting away from those kind of slightly grim plastic trays to kind of more traditional dining equipment. And a lot of that has been made. Obviously, school capital allocations are funds that boroughs hold, not the mayor. And ultimately, it is a borough legal responsibility that school kitchens are maintained. And we're not going to be taking responsibility. However, we are conscious that we have effectively shifted the goalposts on some of this at relatively short notice, and therefore we've kind of worked constructively with boroughs where there have been issues. But what we've been doing, therefore, is working with schools where they have flagged. And because the boroughs have been the primary implementation tool through which this policy has been delivered, both because they've been the holders of the funding for all schools in their borough, and they've been the people that we have worked with. There's a reason I want to thank boroughs for this as well. Then they have tended to be the people who schools would flag issues to. They've reported it back to us, and then we've worked constructively on solutions. So there hasn't been a large chunk of capital put aside to all of this. What we've tried to do there is casework problems through. We've also put a lot of work in from boroughs like Islington and Southwark, where this has been successfully implemented over many years, running kind of good practice seminars, running kind of training and stuff like that, so we can actually better prepare school communities for this. So we've tried to do this kind of in a way that is proportionate without effectively accepting the GLA has statutory responsibilities for school capital funding, which we're simply not funded to do.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I may, just a quick follow-up. Richard, if it does help for future questions, I actually gave you quite a softball question, and if it helps you, I think all colleagues here are councillors bar 2. So we understand how the funding allocations with respect to schools. And at no point did I suggest that it was the mayor's responsibility for capital upgrades in kitchens, although I do appreciate your response on overtime and navigating those issues. So just for future reference, that £30 million came from schools and local government, suggesting that in order to provide the output for those free school meals, it was an estimated cost to them. So that's the nature of my question, and I think you've responded well. But just on the kitchen capital upgrades, have we had any significant pushback on that moving, for the future?
No, we haven't. I think as it has transpired, that 30 million figure hasn't been what it has taken to solve this problem. This has been. The system has worked creatively to solve it in ways that haven't taken up quite any significant sums of public expenditure.
Assembly Member Hall.
Yeah, just something. In some areas, this really does work well. In other areas, knocking on doors, as we all have done, it seems endlessly for the last year. No, I know you're not allowed to. One of the benefits, I imagine, of your jobs. But in some cases, they'll be complimentary. In other cases, they say they are so bad, they're not worth taking up. I've been sent pictures of somebody's lunch that was literally a slice of bread and a wrapped up piece of cheese, you know, one of those triangle things with cheese in it, and that was it. And it's clearly not just the ones that I've heard about. It must be elsewhere. Now, I know it must be under the control of the councils, but given that so much money is going into this, what is it, 140 million? And that's coming out of the group budget. I hope that's not coming out of policing, because we need to make sure that we keep our Londoners safe. But, I mean, what sort of checks are you doing? Are you ever sent information like this? Because I found it quite alarming.
So individual issues have been raised with the GLA by parents. Actually, responsibility for the standard school lunches legally sits with governing bodies, not the local authority, both of maintained and academy schools as well. So as a school governor, which I'm sure lots of people are as well, for a local primary school where, you know, in my neck of the woods, then I have responsibility through that for meeting the government's school food standards. There is both a national policy problem of academies being exempt from the school food rules, which is a loophole I would like to see, but well, we would collectively like to see closed. But also, if individual schools are not doing a good job of meeting those standards, again, that's the kind of thing that if we get evidence, we talk to local authorities, and it's for them to work with the school to solve.
Would it be possible for you to set up a free phone line or something on something on the website in order for people to complain to? Because we all know complaints get lost in the ether. Parents are very often concerned about complaining about anything about the school because their child goes there. I've had children, I know this. You know, you don't always want to make a fuss. And some of the stories I heard were really very bad. So would it be possible, bearing in mind £140 million of taxpayers' money goes to this, for something to be set up quite independently? Because it could be that it's only a few areas, but nevertheless it should be dealt with, because that money is going to those schools.
I'll make a commitment to take that idea away and have a look at it. I mean, obviously, we've never tried to set ourselves up as a police force governing boroughs.
No, but it's money that belongs to taxpayers, and you're giving that money away. So I would be grateful if you'd do that.
Okay, so I'll certainly take that away and come back to you on it.
Thank you.
Okay, Assembly Member Harani. Great. Okay, in that case, we move doggedly onwards to our sixth section, which is the economy. Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. I'll move off food onto the economy. So, Phil, what's the basis of the assumptions of what's been baked into the UK Shared Prosperity Fund for the budget so far?
Well, within the budget that you have in front of you, because of the timing of the government's announcement around UK Shared Prosperity Fund, it has, as we say in the text, assumed just in terms of the figure, a planning assumption that UK SPF would continue broadly at the level that it was at this year. It didn't make any assumptions about how that would be allocated, because we knew there was significant uncertainty around that. We now know at national level that the allocation won't be as high as it was in 24-25. It's reduced by about 40%. We don't know either what that means for London. There hasn't been any information provided so far about allocation to different lead authorities, or what sort of guidance or rules might be put around any allocation that we get around capital revenue splits, or around particular sort of ring fences to particular pillars. There were some specific rules last time around skills provision, for example, that we had to abide with. So at this stage, and we can't say what the allocation would be, or or how we would utilise that, or exactly what choices we would have made. But we will be, as we did last time, engaging in particular with London councils and seeking to put together an investment plan that would be discussed by the London Partnership Board. And I would assume that by the time assuming that the government does actually come in reasonably good time and set out the allocations, that we would be able to incorporate that into the final budget.
That's really helpful. You've started to answer part of what was going to be my second question. So what comes next once it's been announced? But I guess before it is announced, Phil, what opportunities are there, and what are we doing in terms of collectively with London councils in terms of shaping some of the answers to the questions that you've put on the table? So how that potentially reduced funding is distributed across the country, what T's and C's, what strings are attached to the funding that comes when it does come?
And we are certainly making the case to government that the fewer strings and the fewer ring fences that are attached to that funding, the better. And we have in London deployed the first 3 years of funding through the UK SPF quite differently to some other areas of the country. In a number of other places, they've put much larger amounts into the kind of classic regeneration, communities and place side of it. We did a reasonable allocation to that area, but actually, particularly as this scheme was put in place as we were coming out of the pandemic, as economic recovery was a priority at that time, we focused the largest amount of our funding on supporting local businesses, with a significant amount on skills, but with the proviso that the skills funding could only be deployed in the final year of the 3 years. So we would want the flexibility to take those kind of decisions again. We will have to talk to London councils about whether the same kind of route that we took with the first 3 years allocation in terms of direct allocation to boroughs works with a much smaller amount of sum to deploy and with only a year in which to spend it. But those are the kind of decisions we're going to have to take. We have created some really important infrastructure, particularly around business support, through the first 3 years allocation. I think I would be keen through those discussions to try and protect that if we can.
And just finally, I guess we talked about the importance of multi-year settlements, and clearly the success to funding like this is making sure that you've got that longer-term view as well as taking that strategic approach to it. Are you expecting this to be just a one-year settlement when it does come through, or are you expecting it to be longer?
We are expecting details of the one-year allocation that the government's providing for how the one-year allocation of UK SPF will apply to London. So there is definitely a one-year allocation coming, and we're going to have to do the best with that. No one thinks that's the best outcome, but we're going to have to use that as effectively as possible. However, Richard has spoken about the conversations that are beginning with government around a multi-year settlement. In the budget document, the government said it would explore an integrated settlement as is being put in place for West Midlands and Greater Manchester for the GLA. And I would expect, us to be looking at how both UK SPF and any other funding for local or regional economic development was incorporated into that multi-year integrated settlement to give us as much flexibility as possible about how we can deploy it.
Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. Phil, these are obviously to you, and I want to talk to you about the Oxford Street project. Can we expect a provision in this year's TfL's budget and business plan for the delivery of the Oxford Street project?
Yes, we are in discussion with TfL in the final stages of their budget planning process about what initial allocation is needed to support the work that they are doing around the development of the project, the development of the design, and taking it through the initial stages of consultation and so on. Alongside that, there is a lot of work to be done around the overall costs and the business case and the funding mechanism for the project as a whole. So we don't expect at this stage that for next year that TfL's budget will set all of that out in detail, but that's clearly part of the work that we need to do.
I think it's just a bit of extra information, if I may. I think we should all be very clear from the beginning of this. This is, whilst there are elements of this which are transport related that TfL will need to discharge for us, this is not a transport project. This is a commercial and economic project. Therefore, the overall ownership of the project will sit with the GLA, not TfL.
Okay, so when do you think that you'll have some sort of plans and certainly costing for the whole thing, really?
Over the course of the next 12 months, as we carry out the detailed design and take that out to consultation.
I believe that the money that the local council had put aside for repairs and alterations in the area to make the area look better has now been discarded, and that money has gone elsewhere. That means everything is going to take so much longer, and Oxford Street needs some sort of an injection, as I'm sure you will agree.
I don't think it does necessarily mean everything will take so much longer. I mean, those plans that Westminster had to be developing had been under development for some time, and there was still work to be done to implement them. We are moving quickly to develop the detailed design for the full pedestrianisation scheme. We are expecting to begin consultation in the early part of next year around the principles of the redesignation of the road, which makes that possible, and the establishment of a mayoral development corporation. And subject to the outcome of that consultation, we'll be moving quickly to then go out to the public and talk about the detailed design. So, and to move to implementation as quickly as we can. I mean, we are keen to see this move forward quickly, but I think from the Mayor's perspective, his view would be that it's better. What we want to do is to deliver the transformation that's needed to make Oxford Street a world-leading visitor and retail destination, and so we've had to step in to take this to shift the nature of the project to make that happen.
When there's a consultation, is it going to be like some other consultations when absolutely no notice is taken whatsoever of what local people are telling you?
Of course not. However, of course not. And we will look absolutely carefully at what responses come into the consultation, both from local residents but also from businesses and other respondents, in order to decide the best way forward. But I mean, it is important to say that the response from Londoners so far to the Mayor's proposals has been pretty positive. With the most recent, I think it was a YouGov survey that was put out around this, had I think over 60% in favour of the Mayor's proposals and little more than 20% against them. So, when we will want to look at those responses, both in terms of their overall view on the desirability of the scheme, but also critically what they have to say about how we can design it as effectively as possible to balance all of the interests while still making sure that Oxford Street achieves the goals that we're setting for it in terms of visitor, retail, hospitality destination that we can be proud of. Okay,
in an ideal world then, when everything sails through and there are no problems, and I've been told that there is a possibility of a judicial review, so supposing none of that happens, how long do you think, very approximately, it would be from today up? Give us a very rough date of what you would aim for at its best.
I would be very, very cautious about doing that until we've got the design worked through. We think we can complete the consultation processes, and particularly around the redesignation of the road within the next 6 months or so. The establishment of the MDC will take a little longer, but we have had a very clear steer from the Mayor, that we should be moving towards implementation on the ground within the first part of this term, and that's what we're working towards.
So we're looking 2 years if everything goes well. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know at this stage. We need to carry out the detailed design work.
I tell you why, though. The businesses are suffering. They were hoping that the money that the council had put aside to put in some changes would be dealt with quickly. I spoke to somebody who deals with all the bid around there, the business development lady, and she was very concerned that something happens. Well, that this could actually make the things that the local council were going to do take even longer.
So, I mean, just to come into that, because I've been involved in some of those conversations with both NWEC as the local bid and some wider representatives of the business community as well. That isn't the feedback I've been getting. There is absolute clarity that they want something to happen. I agree that that is the feedback. What they don't want is another row like we had in 2016 to 18, where we had what was at that point a consensus scheme developed between TfO and the local authority that then got pulled at no notice by the local authority. Clearly, one of the reasons why we need to go through the steps that we are currently going through is to ensure we don't get a repeat of that kind of screeching U-turn. I think the current Westminster administration have done a really good job of refocusing the council after many failed efforts. A lot of money was spent on different master plans for Oxford Street by the previous administration in Westminster. They spent a lot of money on the Mound project. None of these things went anywhere. And I think the current administration has done a good job about refocusing on tackling the dodgy American candy shops, about coming up with a plan of action for Westminster. For Oxford Street, what we've got though is an opportunity to do something genuinely historic, and that is what we have to seize. I imagine you would sing the praise of Westminster Council, but are they happy that the Mayor is taking over their High Street? There's a constructive dialogue between the Mayor and Westminster Council.
I must write that down. I have lots of constructive dialogues, but they're not happy ones. Are you telling... There you go, you've seen them, but I was led to believe that they're not exactly thrilled to bits that the Mayor is taking over control of their street. Is that right?
As I say, I think there's a constructive dialogue.
How constructive for who, though? Are they happy or are they not?
Constructive for both sides. I mean, you'd have to ask Adam Hugg about Adam's opinions on stuff. I think it's not really for me to give a political opinion on behalf of Westminster.
You've been in part of the conversations. Is he a happy bunny or not? I'm sure he'd let you know.
I think you'd need. It's not for me to give Adam Hugg, to speak on behalf of Adam Hugg. I'm sure you can do that yourself. I think the key point of view from our point is that we are talking at both official and political level to Westminster City Council. There is an active dialogue. This administration is dealing with it very differently than the previous one, who just pulled the scheme for political reasons at very no notice. We're having a far more mature conversation with this administration, and where there are challenges, we are trying to work through those. We are absolutely clear that the scheme that we need to do needs to work for Westminster, and that's exactly what we're trying to develop a scheme to do.
And tell me, how much has the government hinted then that they might give you towards it?
There's been no conversation. We've not made an ask of government funding for this. This should be funding
Did the Mayor gas the previous government for everything? Has he? I mean, turn round and I've asked the government. They've said. I mean, has he stopped asking government because it's a Labour government? Is that what he's done?
I don't think I can answer that question within the terms of my employment contract, Chair. But but broadly, I think this is a London scheme that London needs to be clear that we can stand on our own 2 feet and deliver this kind of thing.
So you must have a very broad idea, a very, very round idea of how much the whole thing would cost. Very, very approximately. What is it? Or what are you aiming to get it in a package within? Or is it endless?
I think Phil's right, though, that clearly we go into this with a broad idea. I think putting numbers, though, into the public domain is actively unhelpful until we do those roles of scoping it. What we are absolutely clear is that we have committed to deliver this scheme and we will deliver it.
Well, no, surely only if people are happy about it. Your consultation, do you remember that you looked at me horrified that you'd go ahead and do something that people didn't want done, but you've done that before, so I'm just concerned, as are some of the people who are very against what they're seeing.
So I think we need to be clear. There is no evidence that Londoners are very against. The only bit of external polling which we didn't commission and is in the public domain puts Londoners basically 3-1 in favour of this scheme. about as good an endorsement you get for any public policy decision in the current highly polarised political environment. And I think where we need to define local residents as, I would define every Londoner as a local resident to Oxford Street. Oxford Street is the nation's high street. It's a London-wide asset. It's a national asset. And I think part of the reason why ultimately we think the mayor needs to drive this is because because we need to be driven by the best economic interests of the whole city.
Okay, I'm sure we're going to come back to this. I do assure you there are people that are far more local than where I live, where Alex lives, miles out of London, as opposed to people in inner London who use this area all the time. I do hope that the police will be consultees on this, because I know other high streets or main areas that have been pedestrianised that become an absolute crime spot. And that is my biggest concern with this whole thing. But I'm sure you will ask them, and I hope you listen. Will be a statutory consultee on the well, and I do hope you listen to what they say. Thank you, Chair.
A couple of other people who want to come in. Two quick thoughts from me. Firstly, I think perhaps a lot of borough leaders across our city's ears might have pricked up when you just said this is a London-wide asset, therefore the mayor should drive it forward. My observation would be this not the only thing in London that could be described that way. And connectedly, do you have prior examples, prior case studies of this model of development? I don't mean of the detail of the scheme. I mean of, the mayor coming in, taking control of a thing that has previously been run by a borough or been under the control of a borough, and the mayor taking over it. Is there a pattern that you're following, or is this a new idea that is being tested here?
So this will be the first time an MDC has been used in a strictly already built-up urban environment. If we were looking at the best example of where a mayor has previously used these powers to drive change, I'd probably point to the Olympic Park, which obviously existed as an urban area before it became an MDC, and the MDC has been critical at kind of bringing all the boroughs together about driving the kind of enormous change we've seen over all three mayors in that particular area. But I think this in terms of where we're looking at examples of how this kind of broad scheme can drive economic development. I think there are examples in some of the rest of the country, for example, going up to Liverpool to make myself miserable watching my football team lose every now and again. Liverpool city centre was largely pedestrianised a few years ago and has thrived as a result of that. But I think the best examples we're looking at are probably international ones, and George Street in Sydney. We were talking to the design of that. We're talking to the designer. We are working with the designers of the new Times Square scheme.
My question wasn't about the merits of pedestrianisation, which I think is well explored, pros and cons. It was about the merits or the prior history of this idea of a city central authority coming in and taking control of something from a borough. That seems to be a new thing.
I mean, I think we've had. Well, I think, as I say, I think that we've used two MDCs before, and I think the system of how we get kind of bringing the different forces together to drive development in an area this is not a novel use of those. It's novel in an already built-up area, but I don't think it's fundamentally novel. What we've had is 20 years of the mayors being able to use the planning system to call in decisions and take them on. So again, I don't think we're talking about stuff that's fundamentally new here. I just think we're looking at applying it in a slightly different way.
Okay, well, we will see. I have Assemblymember Roberts.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you have any London-wide assets in your borough? Assemblymember Roberts that there might be a grab for?
Our borough is the thing of beauty and a joy forever.
Assemblymember Roberts is the London-wide asset.
You're too kind. This is a question for Phil. It's regarding the Mayor's promise to new fund and vision for high streets in the manifesto. Will there be provision for this in this year's budget? And if not, when will there be?
Pardon me. In this year's budget, there is the Civic Partnerships Fund, which is an ongoing fund used for regeneration projects around high streets and town centres across the capital. It provided initial funding for for a broad range of kind of high street and town centre strategies in a number of different areas of the capital, and is now, with this year, rolling out 5 more substantive capital grants for projects across 5 boroughs. I may not remember all of them. There's one in Croydon, there's Hoxton in Hackney, there's one in Lewisham, there is Neasden in Brent, and I can't remember the last one off the top of my head. And we are looking at the option of another round of civic partnerships funding, which would allow us to continue that programme. It was funded through the returns, the capital returns that came from the Growing Places Fund, which was a previous regeneration programme that was done through loans, and there are more returns to come back in, but we need to look at, we need to understand the level of those before we can work out how it can be done. So there is provision for the continuation of that programme, which is targeted directly at high streets. We are also continuing to look at how we can support the wider High Streets network that we built up through the High Streets Challenge Fund in the aftermath of the pandemic. And we'll be continuing to look at how we can support high streets through this year's UK SPF allocation, but I hope much more significantly any integrated settlement that we achieve as part of that multi-year negotiation that we've been talking about earlier in the process.
Thank you. Just touching on the previous plan, the High Streets for All plan that we had, which is, I think, due to wrap up next year, it had a provision for a new plan for underused buildings. One, did we get many underused buildings put in place? 2, if not, will that plan be rolled over into the next plan? And 3, if it is, and once we finally get the estate strategy from the Metropolitan Police, would this include underused police stations?
There are undoubtedly underused buildings, particularly on our high streets, as we've seen the way in which the high streets provision has changed over time. We have funded a number of projects through that initial High Streets Fund that were looking at matchmaking or brokerage services between building owners and potential users, both for small and medium enterprises, but also sometimes social enterprises and charities for other uses, so expand the usage of the high street. There was a particular project in Tulse Hill and West Norwood which created a kind of a matchmaking platform, which I believe has been quite successful to do that, which was funded through the High Streets programme. Alongside that, we have a cross-London programme called Property Exchange, which again is an online platform about connecting landowners and building owners to potential new tenants and potential new uses for those buildings. We have funded that initially through a grant that we were provided by MHCLG, but it is starting to attract funding from private sector landowners as well now, because they see the value in that. I would see that as being, the further development of that as being part of the local economy strand of the growth plan as we pull that together. But we're doing work to look at exactly how that can be developed and funded as we go forward.
Thank you. I have a different subject, if anybody wishes to keep going on high streets, and it's still on economy though, but it's for somebody else.
I'm Oxford Street.
You're Oxford Street. I will yield momentarily if it's helpful to the committee.
Thanks, Gareth, and thanks, Chair. Richard, I just wanted to add Ghent, first of all, to your list of good places that have been pedestrianised. I went on a visit and it was excellent. You said that this is not a transport project, it's an economic project, and my ears immediately peaked up, because I would hope, in some ways the label is partly just an administrative term, but also the aim of it is important, and I would hope that a big aim of this project is to reduce pollution, traffic reduction, and also to have SUDs. Can I just check that assumption is correct?
Yeah, so clearly the consequent traffic measures we have to put in place to deliver the environment, to deliver the pedestrianisation, given private cars have been banned for most of the time on Oxford Street for years, won't have a massive knock-on impact, because we're primarily talking about them buses and taxis being diverted onto neighbouring streets. But clearly there's a process we need to go through for that, and absolutely the aim of that would be to reduce congestion and to make sure the surrounding streets are, don't suffer because of the taking that traffic off Oxford Street. Clearly, any design of the new street has to be highly, it's going to last a number of years, and it has to be highly cognizant of the changing climate that it will face. So things like SUDS, and kind of broader environmental elements of that will have to just are non-negotiable for any design, because it has to be future-proofed.
Excellent. And then my final question on it is: every Londoner is a local Londoner. Every LGBT Londoner, hopefully, is a local Londoner. We have Soho there too, and there's been long talk about pedestrianising Soho. Isn't this a moment to make it wider than just Oxford Street and actually go for it?
I feel I'm getting a contradictory steer from the committee on this one. So the Mayor, that is a matter for Westminster City Council.
Why would Soho be a matter for the City Council, but would because surely it's the same principle that ultimately this is central London, and if a mayor wants to make sure that Oxford Street, as he should do, is pedestrianised, then presumably making it wider is a logical kind of extension of that principle. So I think the question for the mayor, and the question actually that governs whether this is worthy of an MDC and the mayor taking powers, is this a strategic change for London or not? That's ultimately, in the way the Olympics was, in the way that Old Oak Common, in the way that Old Oak Common was. I think Oxford Street, because of its national symbolism and its national significance, sits at that level of kind of grade A project. An intervention into, albeit a very important neighbourhood, one that's got enormous cultural resonance for many communities, and one where there's an active dialogue with the business community around its vibrancy at the moment. Soho is extremely important. I don't think at the moment it is a sense of the mayor coming in and just taking this from the local authority and sorting it out is the solution that we would look to. I would push back. If we looked historically, I'd say Soho is a more culturally and strategically significant place in London than Oxford Street, which is relatively new, but we can argue that another time.
The only thing I might add to what Rich is saying is one of the areas in which we know Oxford Street is underperforming at the moment is in terms of footfall at night. Usage at night, it effectively acts as a barrier between areas of London's nighttime economy that might otherwise be connected. So while it's not directly part of Soho, I think making that, there is a case that the approach that the mayor is proposing, if we get it right, can make that area of London as a whole work more effectively as part of London's nighttime economy.
I think we saw during the pandemic, when Soho was pedestrianised, how amazing it was, and I think pretty much universally people loved it, being able to eat and drink outside on the streets, and obviously it needs to be more accessible, but anyway, I'll move on.
I agree with you. I think the streeteries in Soho were an enormous success. We got very positive feedback from the local business community and others. And I think that whilst, I think taking the view that I agree with you that Soho is an area of enormous both economic and cultural significance is clearly something I know Westminster Council will figure into their future thoughts about the area.
Thank you.
This is exactly the slippery slope I think I alluded to earlier with London's many great citywide assets. Just before we move off this, can I just double sort of a technical question? So perhaps you may not want to answer it already. Perhaps a question for you, Richard. So in terms of the powers that this MDC, or the areas of responsibility this MDC would cover, obviously planning powers are sort of the starting point, presumably highway authority control, question mark. Can it also include, or would you also seek it to include licensing, which is an important part, given what you've just spoken about? Those are really licensing issues around, food and beverage stuff going on late at night. Those are licensing questions, aren't they?
The law doesn't currently allow for MDCs to have any role in licensing.
And you're not seeking that? I mean, obviously there is a Labour government, which I'm told repeatedly you're having great conversations with, and it is within the power of a government to change the law. Constructive conversations.
So, no, we're not currently seeking that at the moment. I mean, at the moment, as we've heard from the committee, we are actively trying to get this delivered on the current scheme within the current law. what the ingredients that we need to drive the delivery of this scheme don't include licensing, and therefore what we are looking at the moment is getting this, getting a world-class redevelopment of Oxford Street delivered within the current laws.
Highways and planning, in other words. Yeah. Okay. Back to Assemblymember Roberts.
Thank you. This is a question for David. It's regarding the Mayor's manifesto commitment to review the recruitment and retention of public sector workers, including the London waiting. The first question is whether this will be extended to the police, because the reason why I ask is that the insufficiency of the London waiting is still being cited by the Met Commissioner as one of the primary issues blighting recruitment and retention of officers in the capital. And if the answer is yes, then when and how would any uplift in London waiting be funded?
Okay, so I mean that's way outside the GLA Mayor budget, but what I can do is direct you to the Home Secretary's statement in terms of the police pay award for this year. And she made some, in response to lobbying from the Commissioner, made some allowances in there around London allowance payments for police officers, and so that's something that I'm sure you'll be picking up in the discussions around the Met budget for next year.
Thank you.
Okay, we now move on to global city and culture. I just observe, I think it was right that we spent time on the Oxford Street plan because it's an important new thing, but we are now running a bit behind. Assemblymember Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. My first 3 or 4 questions are to you, Tunde. In fact, I think all my questions are to you. So, Tunde, what is the total GLA funding required for the new London Museum in the City of London, which happens to be in my constituency? And when will this be completed?
Sorry, I'm afraid you got me on that one again, so I'm the mayoral sponsor of that project. So the total mayoral commitment to that scheme is now £95 million of capital money, plus our statutory obligation to provide ongoing grant funding.
So it's statutory?
So our statutory obligation to provide annual grant funding to the museum.
Right. And when will the project be completed?
At the moment, I think the plan for phase 1 is public opening in 26 and phase 2 in 2028.
And the figures that you've given, how does this compare with initial estimates?
So there has been an increase in the cost of this project. So look, just to get the governance structure right, this is a project that is managed by the Museum of London with close supervision by us and the city as the two kind of statutory sponsors of the museum. So detailed scrutiny would have to go to the museum. However, there has been an increase in the cost of this programme, but both because of the very significant increase we've seen in capital costs for any building project and because of site discoveries, where what you're dealing with is two relatively dilapidated but also listed extremely historic buildings, where your ability as a project team to deal with site discoveries by just demolishing that bit of the building, which is the cheapest way of doing it, is zero. So it was always the case that there were big contingency plans written into this budget. What has changed in the last year is, you will recall that this project was always split into 2. Phase 1, which was the general market building, and phase 2, which is the poultry market building, which is a kind of listed modernist masterpiece, so I am told. Until about 6 months, a few months, a bit less than 6 months ago, only phase 1 was funded, but us and the city have always known that for this museum to be financially sustainable, it would need the commercial income from both parts of the museum. So the deal we announced with the city a few months ago for putting in extra capital from both the city and the GLA and the museum agreeing to raise some more money as well was effectively the funding deal to complete phase 2 and therefore deliver the whole of the museum project, which is what we need for this to be a financially sustainable enterprise.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I understand the reasons why, Richard, but could you put a figure on the increase in costs? Can you quantify it?
What the increase in funding has been over the year? Sorry, I couldn't off the top of my head. I think it's a number of tens of millions, though.
Yeah, I mean, for the GLA, it's 25 million.
Yeah. So the GLA extra funding commitment has been 25 million, but that is both taking us from what was a 70 million commitment that was largely going into fund phase 2 to a 70 million commitment to largely fund phase 1 into a 95 million pound commitment to fund the whole thing.
Okay. Moving on, I suppose I should ask you this, Richard. This question about diversity in the public realm. Would you be the right person? Okay, well, Phil, so the draft budget has no funding for the diversity in the public realm program, but this does not appear in the program ending analysis. So what is the status of this program?
Yeah. So there is still funding to take forward the learning from the Commission. There is still work underway to take forward the learning from the Commission on Diversity in Public Realm, but that is effectively taken forward by staff within the Culture and Creative Industries unit. But we engage with a wide range of cultural projects and others to make sure that they understand that. There isn't a further programme budget. However, the one ongoing programme that we have is around the memorials programme, where we have both a staff allowance for members of staff to engage with the development of those memorials, particularly the memorial to the victims of transatlantic slavery and the memorial to the victims of the AIDS pandemic. And there is also a capital allocation in the reserve, which will be drawn down to support the delivery of those memorials as they move into that phase of the programme. So, although the commission itself has come to an end, and the research and grants programmes that the Commission ran have come to an end, we are still providing staff support to make sure that the outcomes of that work continue.
Right. Again, some figures would help. I don't know if you can sort of give us some figures now. Or...
I mean, it's a very small, it's a small number of staff. It's 3 staff, as Richard says. I believe the budget for the capital reserve for the memorials is 750 million. No, 750,000. Apologies, I just inflated it by 1,000%. 750,000, which will, as I say, it doesn't appear in the budget because it's being maintained as a reserve, but will be drawn down as those memorials move into capital delivery.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to events. I suppose this is a question for you, Tunde. Finally, I think it probably comes under your remit. So, have costs increased for the major events the mayor is supporting? And how will this be addressed?
I'm afraid it's not for me.
No. So it's the Matada's directorate.
I'll bring my briefing note.
Costs have increased in the events industry, notably since the pandemic, and also there are safety requirements. We see Martin's Law coming into force soon, and obviously safety is absolutely paramount, and addressing that is leading to increases in costs. And that's why over successive years we have seen growth in the expenditure on events, because on a delivering the same thing, and it is just more expensive, and that's the reality of where we are.
Okay, but in terms of addressing the increase in costs, I mean, how are we going to sort of deal with that?
So, fundamentally, it becomes a question about scope of the event. Because it is the case that production costs, security costs, all those things are materially higher than they used to be. Safety is non-negotiable, and therefore, if you want to operate within the same cost, you only have to reduce what the event actually is. And sometimes, for instance, New Year's Eve, I forget the percentage, but the cost of the fireworks or whatever it is that people are there to watch is a very small fraction of the overall event cost indeed. It's the infrastructure and the people around it to keep everybody safe that is the cost. And so, that's why, the mayor's taken tough decisions around New Year's Eve ticket prices, trying to find a balance between accessibility and trying to cover these costs with income from those who choose to attend.
Okay. Can I actually turn to one specific event? And I suppose, David, this question should be to you. So, understand from the briefing that £1.5 million is going to be allocated to events in the 25-26 budget. And this would be events like New Year's Eve, which you already referred to, Pride, but also the Notting Hill Carnival. And my understanding is that we give around £900,000 to the Carnival Organising Committee.
So yeah, the Mayor makes a significant contribution, I'll just say of that order, because I can't remember the precise figure, towards stewarding at Carnival. As has been discussed, we are looking at the future support for Carnival, and a little bit of a review of that is the scope of that is just being finalised at the moment. So hopefully more to say on that soon. But undoubtedly, there is going to be a challenge in terms of funding for what we would want to see happen at Carnival.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm coming to, the future. I mean, I don't want to get into the wider politics of Carnival and all the other sort of, and we had this discussion at the Police and Crime Committee as well. But what concerns me is, in terms of your discussions with the organisers, have you actually got any idea of what they are doing themselves to generate more of their own income? To the best of my knowledge, I don't think they've got a sponsor. I mean, it's the second biggest carnival in the world. And I must say, because I made this point before at Police Committee, in terms of the professionalism of the organisation, I think that there is considerable scope for them to generate their own income.
Yeah, so I think there's some sponsorship income generated that funds some of the floats or some of the music stages, for instance. But you're right. Carnival clearly is, and given its history, it's a very different event to, say, a normal music festival where it's a defined footprint and tickets are sold. Clearly, culturally that's not what Carnival is, and it's I think the goal is to put Carnival on a path at which appropriate sponsors may be more interested than they perhaps would have been in the past about sponsorship and associating their organisation with it.
I mean, I do remember some years ago, I'm talking about sponsorship of the Carnival as a whole, not individual floats. I think there was talk about, was it Virgin Atlantic or but anyway, I wouldn't go down. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on. If I could move on to the next section, Chair.
Yeah, I don't think I have any indication. I don't have any indications to come in on global city and culture. So yeah, if we move on to next section, which is GLA core functions, which is number decide. Core functions. Yeah.
Okay. So this will be to you, Diane. How confident are you that the assumed pay award for 25-26 will be accepted by the GLS staff?
So just to explain, it's not the GLA staff that need to agree. We go through Unison through the collective bargaining process. So it will be negotiations we hold with Unison.
But what's your own views? I mean, where are we with the negotiations?
Shall I come in there? Because actually I ultimately lead on the negotiations. So we have formally offered Unison team the 2.5% for all staff. We have had only the first meeting with them to make that formal offer. And we continue negotiations.
So this is 2.5%?
Yes.
Yeah. And what's the expected inflation rate? I think it's high, 25-26 is expected to be some 3.5%?
Well, currently, so we have based the offer partly on the affordability within the budget, and which reasons we explain here. But also we know currently current inflation rates are below 2.5. I think at 1.7 at the moment. There's uncertainty about where those are going, the inflation rates. But at the moment, at the point we enter into negotiations, they're at 1.7. I mean, the other point I wanted to make here is that, we operate the pay award on an annual basis, and we have to consider annually what's affordable. We're talking about the award for next year, of course, 25-26. In the current year, we negotiated and agreed an award of 4.5% for all staff. And the year before, we had a differentiated award that went up to over 8% for our lowest paid staff. And so, each year, the award needs to be seen in context of the prevailing inflation rates, but also the current position. And the award this year, 4.5%, I felt that was absolutely fair. I was very pleased to agree that. We've been paying that since May. Local government award this year, however, has only been 2.5%, just agreed. So, we need to just constantly keep in mind what's happening broadly in the broad public sector. Yeah. Tell you one time, what I'm trying to do, and I know what in fact I have to say what the Unison colleagues and the management side are trying to do together is to arrive at a fair award in a timely fashion that allows us to pay it from the beginning of the financial year. Having inherited, when I arrived, pay awards that weren't agreed until October, November, December. And so, if we're going to try and achieve a timely agreement, then we have to start that process now. And we're starting that based on an offer of 2.5%.
Okay, fine. Jeff, before I finish, can I just something that Robert said earlier about free school meals? It was actually Labour-controlled Newham Council as a member of the Cabinet and Labour-controlled Newcastle that actually pioneered the free school schemes. Islington was the third council, but in 2009, Islington was under no overall political control. So it was actually Labour councils that pioneered the free school meals programme.
I feel we've had enough party political broadcast on behalf of the Free School Meal Party for one committee meeting. We have moved on from that topic. We have moved on from that topic. Assembly Member Giorgio, I think you had a question.
The second one, fishing for a deputy mayoralty. This is a very simple question. How much is the NI rise announced in the budget and the minimum wage increase going to cost the GLA?
£2 million.
Is that across the GLA family or just this building?
Just this building, just the GLA core budget that you've got in front of you today.
No, so in terms of overall across the family, do we have those figures?
It's in the region of about 70 million.
How much?
70 million.
17 or 70?
70.
70, okay, right.
But that's going to come back, isn't it?
Yeah, but as the committee will know, the government has made a commitment to refund public sector organisations.
Not all public sector.
Just as it did, the previous government did when they raised employer national insurance contributions a few years ago. And we await details of the precise mechanism, but we absolutely do expect all that cost that Faye set out to be compensated by the government.
Right. Appreciate that, David. So just to be clear, you were expecting the government to cover the 70 million. Whatever the mechanism is, that's what you're expecting?
Yes.
Right, okay. And going back to Faye, so that 70 million was the NI plus the minimum wage?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Okay, and presumably that if we have suppliers, they wouldn't be covered by that. So there could be some cost inflation in our budgets where we have outsourced providers supplying goods and services to the GLA that we're buying. We would then indirectly be paying that cost through that price, presumably.
Yeah, and the questions ever will be, the extent to which companies absorb cost increases, whether this or any other cost increase, and the extent to which they pass it on, and then, often we're in contracts that are fixed price for a number of years, and so these things come out in the wash over time.
Okay, sorry,
just from speaking to some local authorities, they're anticipating 5-6 million, but they're not being refunded by the government. So I'm just trying to understand the mechanism. Is it different for the GLA than it is at local authorities?
So, the government has made a statement about refunding public sector staff costs. What happened last time was that there was a general services grant, I think it was called, that if my memory serves me correctly, that the government introduced, and that was designed to cover the costs of that. They may have done something different for the police. I can't completely remember off the top of my head. And so we await the government deciding whether they're going to use that mechanism or a different one. But I would anticipate when we get the provisional police, local government and fire settlements at some point in December, that will set out their approach.
If I may, I think the difference between us and local authorities on this one is where local authorities who will be refunded, as we understand it, for all of their own costs, are so acutely vulnerable to the commissioning market around social care, primarily, as we saw in the news yesterday, that because it's such a seller's market for specialist care places, if a specialist care provider puts up its costs because it doesn't feel it can absorb them, local authorities just have to pay. Because that's not a field of activity we are in, we don't have the same level of vulnerability to it.
No, I appreciate it. I think, Chair, it would be helpful, given that there isn't a direct mechanism for this specific thing, it would be helpful just for it to come back to us at some point once we know where the money's coming from and when. That would be helpful.
Yep. Well, the good news about this committee is we meet, many times between now and February, so there'll be lots of opportunities, I suspect.
I'm sure this will be set out in the draft group budget in January.
Yep. So that takes us to me, in actual fact. Quick question about the Crystal Palace National Sports Centre, Richard, and sort of what we're looking at in terms of cost for that, what the GLA's contribution to it we think might be, and perhaps most importantly, when it might reopen for people?
Certainly. So I think Chair, forgive me, in private session I'll answer that question precisely. I think it would be actively unhelpful for me to put a precise figure for our budget in the public domain at the moment, because we're about to go into a tender process, and if I advertise to potential bidders what our sitting budget is, it's not a very smart negotiation technique. But I'm very happy to answer that question in private session. I'll brief you and the committee on it separately. It is a major investment in Crystal Palace. At the moment, the aim is to wholly kind of refit, refurbish, and with the support of the Green Finance Fund, make the first ever zero carbon for the National Sports Centre building. And phase 2, which is the stadium, is currently unfunded, and we are looking to work with partners on that. But we are, the Mayor's ambition is clearly out of this investment in that, genuinely brilliant facility to get the stadium going as well. The timetable for construction is that we are going into a kind of hopefully we're going into a tendering process within the next few months. That takes, for a contract of this size that can take, 9 months to a year. So I'll come back to you with the precise programme. But again, we're looking at the whole work being finished in around 2028.
So around 2028, fully complete. Hopefully, I'm not going to hold you to that, but it's a useful estimate. Okay. And what I will hold you to is your offer to let us know in private. That would be useful. Thank you very much. I think that takes us to Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. A quick question for David. The Mayor's draft budget 25-26, page 12, states that £454,000, nearly £500,000, was spent on post-election changes to the Mayor's office structure. What does that mean, and why was the cost so high?
So that obviously is not a kind of a post-election cost directly. It's in the budget for across the year 25-26, and it's for a combination of reasons. Changes in the mayoral advisor posts appointed by the mayor, some new paid service posts, changes to some existing posts, including making one fixed-term post permanent, some error correction in terms of the previous figures that were in there, and of course the usual inflationary uplifts in salaries that you would see come into that budget, as you would all other staffing budgets.
So includes in this £500,000 of taxpayers' money includes some additional advisors appointed directly by the mayor.
So not additional mayoral advisors because the number of mayoral advisors is...
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you just said there was additional mayoral
so
advisors.
I said there were changes in mayoral advisor posts.
Oh, I see.
But the number of mayoral advisor posts is capped in statute. But yes, there are some new paid service posts within the mayor's office. Yes.
Is it possible to get a breakdown of those figures?
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't see any other questions on that section. That takes us to our final section, which is on GLA core reserves. Assembly Member Georgiou.
Faye, you'll know this is my favourite topic already. The budget document shows reserve balances anticipated in March 2028 of 87 million for the capital programme and 66 million for the climate change reserve. Can you tell us why you consider these specific reserves to be important and why we should maintain them at their current levels?
So in terms of those particular reserves, they are earmarked for specific things. I might have to ask for some colleagues around the capital reserve and the green finance reserve, because as you know, I'm new in role and I haven't had a chance yet, which is on my list, to look at every single reserve and make sure I'm comfortable and satisfied with them. So I'm going to hand over to Phil.
I can answer on the Green Finance Reserve. The Green Finance Reserve was established at the same time as the Green Finance Fund. It was established to provide support for project development and for project financing to enable the Green Finance Fund to operate as successfully as possible. I was discussing with Assembly Member Polanski earlier the Enablers and Accelerators programme, and that was funded through an initial allocation from that reserve. We have also deployed that some amounts from that reserve to reduce the cost of borrowing slightly for a short period for projects in order to make the Green Finance Fund attractive and to build up the pipeline. And finally, we are looking at the moment at the utilisation of that reserve for funding some of the work for funding the initial development work of the London Office for retrofit, because we expect that to have a really important role to play in pipeline development. But critically, as we move into, as we develop further funds and further financing mechanisms through the London Climate Finance Facility, having that reserve available for seed funding or for technical support and so on is going to be really important in terms of making sure the pipeline is there.
Right, okay. Given I don't want Assembly Member Polanski to tell me off after this meeting, I won't go down with my questioning. I appreciate David and Richard may want to come in on what I'm about to ask in a bit. But Faye, coming back to you, we are seeing a significant decline in GLA reserves between now predicted through to 2028. In fact, if we're looking at this year, we're at 640 million, declining down to 368 million by 2028. Surely that's not sustainable, in particular if, given that the government allegedly finds itself in a tricky financial position, that the mayor may not receive the multi-year settlement that he was expecting, even though he significantly reduced his ask. Looking at that steady decline, are you comfortable with the trajectory that we're heading in?
So all the reason why those reserves are reducing over time is because they're earmarked for specific projects and there are specific plans around those. So that's why those reserves are declining over time. There are within the budget sort of risk reserves, such as the interest rate smoothing reserve within that, and the more generic reserves. And I'm certainly comfortable with the level of reserves that we're spending in terms of 25, 26 and beyond that till the end of that period. But obviously in my role, as you know, I will be looking at the level of reserves on an ongoing basis and continue to satisfy myself that that's a robust financial budget, as I'm sure GLA colleagues will ensure we are.
Yeah, sorry, I don't quite understand how you could be satisfied, simply because I understand that some of them are earmarked reserves going into the future. But then again, we've had a response from Phil that some of them are not necessarily they're reserved for specific projects, but for unforeseen circumstances, i.e. reduced borrowing. So I don't understand how we're anticipating a halving of reserves. All of those were previously earmarked, and you could still be comfortable with the trajectory that we're going in, because once they're gone, and then barring some other mechanism, you know, it's difficult to bolster it back up to where we are today. So I don't understand how, looking at the long-term progress and decline in reserves, you could be comfortable, or anyone could be comfortable. Because, you know, as we've seen with the pandemic, recent inflationary rises, pay rate, all of that, there are unforeseen circumstances. So could you just explain to me why, once again, why you're so confident?
So I think it's really important that reserves are there for smoothing purposes, but they're also there to be used in order to deliver priorities. So although what you wouldn't also want to do is just hold on to those reserves forever without having proposals to do things with them to make London a better place to be. And so that's the skill there, is getting that balance right between having enough reserves that manages those risks and still ensuring that those priorities are delivered. And so there are within that budget a couple of lines which are specifically around the more generic risks, and those level of budgets I think are reasonable by the end. I can't remember how much they are by the end of the at least £30 million by the end of that period. And so therefore, on top of the earmarked reserves, are those more generic risks to cover those kind of things that we're talking about within the budget by the end of that period.
I was just going to actually build on Faye's point, which is to say that, to your point, it's about the risks we face, and the two things that you might say we face particular risks for, in terms of income, would be our interest receipts, and there's a reserve maintained for that, and we have a clear policy about the level of that reserve and why it's set where it is. And then it's at group level, because this risk affects the entire GLA group, not just the GLA Mayor budget. We have the business rate reserve, which reflects risks around business rates, which we touched on a little bit earlier in the discussion. So I was just going to say that those reserves are there to handle those, which are the two big key risks we have. And then other reserves are for particular areas of delivery, whether that's the free school meals where that funding crosses a year, whether it's the Museum of London that we've talked about, or the periodic need for an elections budget. And so they're managed in accordance with their purpose.
Yeah, I think the thrust of it, by the way, I appreciate that you and Richard need to go, so don't, if someone else can pick it up if you have to leave in a minute. I think part of the concern, and I think moving forward, looking towards January, is delving deeper into the earmarked versus non-earmarked, simply because, as I come back to the point, David and Faye, is that, yes, a lot of it's earmarked, but as people keep telling me, or I keep reading, not in the Mirror, mind you, that, once again, a multi-year settlement on the scale that the Mayor wants is not necessarily on the cards for this government. So therefore, yes, some of these earmarked reserves may be for future projects, but they could be moved into a pipeline for future reassessment, because the Mayor may no longer be able to afford them and have to dip into those reserves. So I think in future it would be, I think a breakdown would be really helpful, David, to look at the difference between the earmarked and non-earmarked when we come to January. Just to have a proper analysis. I know they're in the papers, but in a more simplified form would be very welcome.
So absolutely can think about that for the final GLA Mayor budget in March. Feedback about presentation is always welcome. What I just would say is that, to your point, it's the purpose of the budget process, is to say, OK, this is the resources available to the authority. Right, how are we going to deploy them? Are we going to hold some of them back for the future? And so that's absolutely the sort of thing that the Mayor has to decide and we should be discussing.
So my plan was to conclude at 12:45, and here we are at 12:45 to the minute. So could I thank our guests for attending today, and the panel for their wonderfully timely questions. We have a few more items of business just before we wrap up, but you're welcome to leave. Thank you very much. I don't know if you wanted to stay behind, Richard, for a brief in-camera session. Can I ask the committee to note the report and discussion, and delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Can I ask the committee to note the committee's work programme and its dates? Well done. Next meeting of the committee will be on the 11th of December 2024, 10 a.m. here in the chamber at City Hall. I have no urgent business today, so that concludes today's meeting. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chair.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.